Hello there and welcome to another video, and this one is much different to my many other videos I've done because in this video we're going to discuss and maybe answer a question that has been in the heads of many since 1997. Who is the best girl for Cloud Strife? For a decade now, a war has raged between Aerith and Tifa fans, and has raged on with the recent releases of the remakes, with the wars only intensifying. In this video I want to discuss who is the better love interest for Cloud. Here we'll have a generalized view on the events of the original story, the remakes, official merchandise, spin-offs, and anything else worth noting like official commentary from the creators and writers themselves of Final Fantasy VII. Something I will like to note in regard to the discussion of the topic is a few things I will and will not really talk about in this. For starters, most Tifa fans often only care about her looks rather than her character. Looks do not matter whatsoever. These characters are full studying and their behaviors are far more important. Just because Tifa has big tits doesn't mean that she's interesting or better. Conversely, a lot of Aerith fans hate the character of Zack, and seem to have a massive dislike to the prequel Crisis Core, and the sequels Advent Children and Dirge of Cerberus. I will include every story and anything that's significant in terms of information from these sequels and the prequel. I am also going to try and be as objective as possible, but at the same time I want to only concentrate on Cloud, Aerith and Tifa. Mentions of other characters like Zack will only be mentioned if needed or for comparison's sake. I will be including things from behind the scenes and the creation of the game and story, which does include some very interesting trivia and insights from the makers about how they portrayed Aerith and Tifa, which might provide a bit of insight as to why the characters act the way they act and maybe even give a clue as to who is the right girl. Similarly, if you have a personal preference, that's perfectly fine, but going after and attacking the opposition is no way going to win you any favours. Even if you disagree with some of the findings in this video, it is not the end of the world. You can still go ahead and ship away, no one really cares. Plus, there's something about the devs which I will get into later on in the video, which basically confirms that both sides can do whatever the hell they want. This video will go over spoilers, so don't get upset if something is revealed. For starters, the original game came out in 1997, and whilst the remakes do, for the most part, follow the similar structure, they are more modern releases and may contain obvious spoilers if you have not played them. I will also make a note that during the making of this particular video, it took quite a lot of time to develop the script and come up with what I was actually going to talk about. So much so that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was released during the making of this, and thus I will admit, any Rebirth discussion is essentially last minute additions and may contain some mistakes. I also don't own the game, so I'm basing this on what I've seen on online playthroughs. I would also like to stress that this is in no way a fully serious guide, and this is just a bit of fun going over everything in a generalized format, looking at particular moments and highlights throughout the games and everything else in between. Now, without further ado, let's begin. The first thing I would like to note is how Final Fantasy VII structured the idea of Cloud and love interests. The game is actively subtle and doesn't give an answer to who is Cloud's so-called true love. Sometimes it will show a scene where Cloud and Aerith are very close together, but then it will show a scene with Tifa and Cloud together and are also very close. This is of course because the game is actively giving the player the choice over whether they prefer one girl over the other. This is most notable in the Gold Saucer date, but we'll get there when we get there. The first part of the Final Fantasy VII compilation we need to quickly go over is the events before the main game itself, i.e. Crisis Core. The things that happen way before the prequel events, and to be fair, Cloud is not the main character in this, nor is Tifa, but Aerith does play a big significant role. However, well, you'll see why I'm not really going to talk about Aerith that much. For starters, Cloud has a fascination with Tifa. Having been a sheltered child, he often saw Tifa having fun with other kids, and aspired to be out there and have fun with her. As time passed, Cloud decides to join Soldier so that he can impress Tifa, and this is a major plot point, something that is so pivotal and it holds significance to the overall story, as if it were not for Cloud's attempts to impress a girl, in this case Tifa, he would never have joined Shinra in the first place and become a soldier, or at least he thinks he does. So already we have a lead to Tifa being the right girl for Cloud, as not only does she have a history with him, but it's also because of her that he becomes the hero that we all know and love. Tifa in turn dreams of Cloud rescuing her like your atypical damsel in distress, a very classic scenario as depicted in her dreams. However, if you don't know already, Cloud stumbles his chances of becoming a first-class soldier, and instead is a pretty low-ranking individual, all things considered. To make matters worse, he is sent on an assignment back to Nibelheim with his hero Sephiroth and good friend and mentor, Zack. He is mostly ashamed because he failed his promise to Tifa. He didn't become a soldier, and as a result he hides his face. He believes he is a failure and unworthy of her. Speaking of Zack, at this moment in time he is dating Aerith. There is nothing really to add because this video is about Cloud, Aerith and Tifa rather than Cloud, Aerith, Tifa and Zack, so we're going to be moving on. Sephiroth eventually goes insane after some insight to the ancient beings called the Cetra, and his so-called mother, Genova, influenced him to go on a rampage and slaughter everyone in the village of Nibelheim. This includes the death of Tifa's father, who she was very close to. Now, keep in mind, in Cloud's falsified memories, he is in place of Zack rather than some generic soldier backup. He creates the illusion that he is a first-class soldier who took on Sephiroth after his rampage and tried to protect Tifa, who knows that Cloud is there. In reality, Zack is the one that battled Sephiroth. Tifa, technically speaking, doesn't even know that Cloud is here, and she gets hurt when she tries to confront Sephiroth after he murdered her father. Cloud tries and does succeed in the end in defeating Sephiroth, but is also seriously wounded. For 5 years, nothing really happens between Cloud and Tifa, as Cloud is essentially put in a test tube. He is repaired from his severe injuries from Sephiroth and is experimented alongside Zack. Cloud, once released, is almost comatose and thus is unable to do much as Zack finds out that it's been 5 years since the Nibelheim incident, and with him receiving increasingly downtrodden messages from Aerith. Zack eventually gets mowed down and Cloud takes his sword, becomes his living legacy, so to speak. Slowly approaching Midgar, this is where Tifa finds out that Cloud is back and proceeds to ask about an avalanche to hire the Cloud, given that he has potential skills. She believes that Cloud is a first-class soldier and has succeeded in his mission, when the truth is he didn't. Now, a few things to note about this current state of things before the main game begins, and these are things that are going to be included in the dialogue of the game later on. The first thing I want to talk about is the concept of the idea of young love versus mature love. It's clear from the dialogue that Aerith gives in the original game that her relationship she had with Zack was, as she puts it, nothing really special, as she acknowledges it was nothing more than just teenage young love. Sure, she does have some sadness to Zack seemingly abandoning her, although we all know that he died and was experimented on for 5 years, so it was technically out of his control, and she acknowledges it wasn't really serious, all things considered. Similarly, Zack is a bit of a flirtatious guy, and we see that he flirts with pretty much all the women, so to say that him and Aerith would have lasted, I honestly don't think it would have. So while Aerith is able to just move on from Zack, what about Tifa and Cloud? Well, one could make a similar argument. Listen to the way Tifa dreams of an almost fairy tale-like idea of her being rescued by a big strong hero in Cloud. Then let's see what actually happened in Nibelheim, where she isn't saved by Cloud, and instead everything burns around her. Her father is killed, and she is wounded by Sephiroth. It's then no wonder that she eventually grows up to learn to fight her own battles and become more independent. The dream essentially died that day. This is the real world, not some childish fantasy, so to speak. Similarly, Cloud is a character trapped in the past. He takes Zack's story and morphs it into his own. He still wants to be the idealized hero, and we see later on just how the past controls Cloud in more ways than one. Essentially, all three characters suffer from the classic harsh reality and friendly lies. Tifa and Cloud believe in the idealized hero saving the damsel in distress in her time of need, while Aerith believes in having a companion after years of loneliness. But these three characters are canonically only 16 and thus not really in the right mental state of mind to form mature or intelligent decisions, let alone actual relationships. Young love is often not serious nor important, as Aerith puts it. While she definitely liked Zack, it was not important nor serious. Mature love is where we have actual adults taking their time with their feelings and emotions, something which I think is important for this analysis. It is also worth noting that the idea of the past, present and future plays a pretty huge role in Final Fantasy VII and its many sequels, spin-offs and even the remakes, and I will try to touch upon this later on. Okay, so in the original game, the first girl Cloud meets is actually Aerith. After the reactor bombing, Cloud bumps into Aerith in the streets, telling her to flee from the chaos. Here we meet one of the first choices in the game, which all culminate into the eventual Gold Saucer Day, which I'll discuss later. This is important to note as we must now discuss what's the canonical choice, and thankfully not only do we have the words of the writers themselves, but also the remake and other Final Fantasy VII related media, which confirms the canonical choice for this particular moment is Cloud actively buying the flower from Aerith. This flower is later used for another choice, that being whether to give it to Tifa or Barrett's daughter Marlene. Again, the canonical choice is to give the flower to Tifa. Later on, when Aerith asks if Tifa is Cloud's girlfriend, the canonical choice is for Cloud to deny this. Something worth noting is more often than not, the canonical choices in the game are the ones that make the most logical sense. Cloud buys the flower out of a kind gesture and also just to get Aerith off his back. Similarly, the flower is given to Tifa because he knows her, and Marlene is a complete stranger. And him denying Tifa is his girlfriend is because at this point they're clearly not at that stage at all. At this point, Tifa and Cloud reminisce about the good old days, and we now have one of the biggest controversies in the game. Why did Tifa, despite the knowledge of what happened in Nibelheim, continue to feed Cloud's delusion? This is such a contested point as it's explained away as simply Tifa trying to make Cloud happy. Yet it's seen as a very manipulative tactic, feeding false lies to keep him contained, which ironically is a form of abuse that is often seen in real relationships. Manipulative lies to essentially control someone. Although in Tifa's case this isn't done on purpose and isn't done maliciously, there's another big reason for this rather poor action, one which, once again, I will elaborate more later on, because it's extremely important, especially as from this point onwards there's not a huge amount with Tifa and Cloud other than the odd moment or reminiscing of the past. So skipping a bit, Tifa joins Cloud and Barrett and the others for the next bombing mission, where they are ambushed and tricked by Shinra, resulting in Cloud falling down to his death. Also, Tifa and co faints. Cloud is miraculously saved when he falls on top of a flower bed inside a church, and here he is reunited with Aerith, for the first time learning her actual name as opposed to just the flower peddler. The two chat with conversation leading to the infamous one date. What is this one date? It's never truly clear. Is it the short adventure they have to a house, the night out at the war market, or even the gold saucer? Who actually knows? Cloud agrees to be her bodyguard and goes on this date, especially as she's being hunted down by the Turks because, for reasons we don't know at this moment in time, she is very special. The two go back to her house with them discussing their lives and even aspirations. Aerith at one point claiming she'd be good in soldier, which makes Cloud laugh. This is rather significant, as Cloud so far has been very stoic in his approach, and has not really shown any emotions, yet with Aerith his stoicism is lowered and he shows some, albeit very minor, emotions, like a chuckle. Upon arriving to her home, Cloud meets her mother and we get another choice moment where Cloud is asked whether or not Tifa is his girlfriend or not. And as I've already mentioned, the canonical version is that she isn't. Most notably, all the scripting and dialogue goes as far to point out that Tifa is nothing more than a childhood friend. So yeah, poor Tifa kinda gets friend-zoned a lot in this game. During the scene, we see something interesting happen, as he is told in secret by Aerith's mother to leave and never see Aerith again. Of course, we know this is because of Zack, but it also shows us that her mother can clearly tell that Aerith is already somewhat infatuated with Cloud, despite only just meeting him. Cloud does agree to leave during the night, but as he leaves to go back to Tifa and the rest, he is approached by Aerith, who has managed to wander off and, for some reason, end up ahead of Cloud, and knows that Cloud would try to run away. Reluctantly, he and Aerith go off together through a shortcut, so to speak, through the slums to get back to Tifa, Barrett and co. This brings us to one of the most impactful scenes in the entire game, one so impactful it actually received official artwork by Yoshitaka and Namo of these exact moments. Here we learn that Aerith had a boyfriend once upon a time, who was in Soldier. It's also explicitly clear, and this is something that a lot of people seem to miss out on, that it wasn't serious, and it's interesting to see how calm and thoughtful Cloud is here, listening and answering without being stubborn or rude like he was with Barrett and the other members of Avalanche. Now then, compare this interaction with Aerith to how he interacts with Avalanche earlier. With Avalanche, and even Tifa for that matter, he puts on a stoic act. He seems to not really care about what their mission is about, nor what the other characters have to say. He just wants to be paid as a mercenary, and that's it. But with Aerith, that stoicism is immediately dropped, and we see a different Cloud, one who emotes, one who can be calm and even caring. It's an interesting 180, and one that could probably be explained by the fact that Cloud doesn't really need to put on an act on Aerith compared to Tifa, who he has history with, and wants to impress. Aerith, though, he doesn't need to do all of that. She just enjoys his company and she talks to him almost constantly, compared to Tifa awkwardly shuffling her feet and giving him cocktails with minimal interaction, or Avalanche having very little dialogue between him and them. When interacting with Aerith, Cloud is more human and less robotic. Their short, tender chat is soon interrupted by the sudden and almost coincidental appearance of Tifa, as she is dressed exotically and being taken by a carriage to Don Corneo. Cloud, under the encouragement of Aerith, goes off to rescue her, where Cloud and Aerith wander the wool market. Here we get a humorous moment where Aerith comes up with an idea for Cloud to cross-dress to try and save Tifa from Don Corneo, who wants a new wife, so to speak. While she in turn puts on a dress, take note that despite him showing frustrations initially at first, Aerith essentially encourages him and he finally just goes through with this harebrained scheme. He could have gone into Don Corneo's palace swords blazing, but instead he listens and pretty much goes through with Aerith's plan, showing he trusts her enough and potentially may even think she's onto something, no matter how bizarre the plans may be. This brings me on to the difference between Tifa and Aerith in their interaction with Cloud. Both women have obvious differences in the way they chat with Cloud. With Aerith, she puts on a back and forth with Cloud, asking him and answering him back. Aerith is also willing to question Cloud's motives and behaviour. She may seem happy and bubbly most of the time, but she can call out Cloud if he's being obstruse. She can see right through Cloud and pretty much lower his guard, while also giving him advice and being extremely helpful. Tifa, on the flip side, is pretty much just a loyal dog. She never really questions or even does much in terms of conversation. We pretty much see throughout the game Tifa and Cloud's conversation amount to talking about the past or asking if one another is alright, and the other responds with a simple closed answer like yes or no. There's very little back and forth with Tifa, and really the only moment this happens later on in the story is near towards the climax, and even then, Tifa continues to basically be the yes man, or in this case yes woman, blindly following Cloud into battle, agreeing with everything he says or does, or even just staring blankly at him. Now, this can be explained away by the fact that Tifa is meant to be very shy and Cloud is, well, socially awkward. I guess while we're at it, we might as well address the personalities of both girls. Whilst the characters are varied and different, one common criticism I've seen online is how many of the characters are kind of bland. Ironically, there's some exceptions, and one of these exceptions is Aerith. Aerith is depicted as overly excitable, positive, bubbly, and we later see that she has some hints of depression, which is brought on by her loneliness in her life. She is also very selfless and cares for her friends. Meanwhile, Tifa is shy. And, well, she's Cloud's childhood friend. Yeah, Tifa is as interesting as sandpaper in the original story. Her shyness is honestly the only thing that she has. And I do like the idea that despite her appearance, she is perhaps the shyest character of the group, too nervous to speak or do much, and despite her being this big, tough fighter girl, she's actually quite cowardly and timid in many ways. It's a complete contradiction from her looks to her personality. I do quite like that in some standards. But as I mentioned earlier, she really is just a loyal dog to Cloud, and that's really it. There's some attempts here and there, particularly the Under the High Wind scene, which in my opinion is the best defense for Tifa, and it's clear that she does indeed love Cloud and does value him. It's very obvious through the dialogue. So much so that she's willing to keep a lie about him to basically make sure that he stays happy. And she does have the odd hints of nervousness and lack of confidence, which of course she slowly develops, but in terms of dialogue and actions, she comes across as very bland in comparison to Aerith, who is a lot more exaggerated and a lot more hyper. Now, I'm going to say something very controversial, but if Tifa didn't look the way she did, and instead looked less big in the assets department, and she looked more like a plain background character or just a plain girl, I bet people wouldn't have remembered her as much, because her personality is that lacking. There's a reason why the writers used to just refer to her as, and I shit you not, Boing-chan. Because, let's be honest now, most people like Tifa for her looks, which is why they probably struggle to think of a single thing she did other than her past with Cloud and the obvious Under the High Wind scene, which we will obviously get to later. So why does it seem that all the balls are in Aerith's court while Tifa's been left to rot despite the past experiences with Cloud? Well, I mentioned earlier, there's a reason why Tifa's actions seem so unusual when it comes to Cloud and his false memories. Why she has quite a bland personality. Why she seems rather lacking. That's because Tifa was a last-minute addition to the story. In the original story of Final Fantasy VII, Tifa wasn't included. In fact, according to many interviews and sources online, the devs claim that the characters you would have followed as the main trio was Cloud, Barret, and Aerith. In fact, these were going to be the only playable characters in the game. As development grew, however, characters like Red and Cat She was added in. Vincent was also developed into the story, and so was the plot. In the original story, Sephiroth and Aerith were originally going to be brother and sister. Then they changed it to former lovers before being just complete strangers. And it was Barret who was going to meet his end at the hands of Sephiroth. However, the devs and writers for the story realised that Barret dying probably wouldn't have had much impact, especially as the first half of the game has Barret belittling and questioning Cloud's true intent. He is so distrustful of Cloud that you really wouldn't get the sense that these two would become best buddies in the whole wide world. So it was eventually decided that Aerith would be the one killed off, as they believed a character that Cloud would fall in love with, and in turn the players would fall in love with, getting murdered in front of their very eyes would be more emotionally devastating. Now the key point there is the idea that Cloud and the players fall in love with Aerith, and thus they would be devastated and want to fuck Sephiroth up. So when did Tifa get added in and why? Well, she was added in, and I kid you not, because of a joke during a phone call. One phone call resulted in the creation of an entire character. And with the fact that Aerith, the main heroine of the story, dying, this meant that a second heroine could be inserted to fill the void. But they then decided they would change that idea as well. And they decided to have some fun with the idea of having two main heroines purposely in a love triangle inserted into the story as a bit of fun. You heard that right. The writers purposely made Tifa just to have a love triangle for a bit of a joke. I must admit, I was quite shocked when I researched this, but hey-ho. But of course, at the same time, it also explicitly made it that so that neither Aerith nor Tifa would actually get in Cloud's pants. Sorry, is that a spoiler? I'm afraid it's true. The devs never had any intention with Cloud ending up with either girl. Sure, there was some intention in the past, like in the original story, Aerith and Cloud would have been together and had a happy ending. Then when Tifa was added in, they decided to say Tifa would end up with Cloud after Aerith's death, but then they decided to just go with no one gets Cloud. Yeah, that's right, no girl canonically gets with Cloud. Anyways, so now that Tifa was created, this meant that she had to do something, and thus she was essentially crowbarred into the story, in many cases replacing other characters in particular scenes. I'm almost confident that had Barret died in the original story, the end of the Highwind scene most likely would have just been with Cloud and Aerith, and there is rumour that there is a development picture which shows just that. Similarly, I am also confident that the original story in mind, the War Market and Don Corneo's wife selection would have been with Jessie Raspberry instead. But now Tifa was in the game, it meant that that role, and because she was made to be the childhood friend of Cloud, could be filled in, and not only that, but because she's a childhood friend of Cloud, there is a lot more stakes with our main protagonist. In turn, however, this also highlights why Aerith seems way more developed, interesting, and has personality compared to the more stale Tifa, as well as the fact that Jessie and other characters don't really do so much in the game and are pretty forgettable. This may also explain why Tifa's actions of not telling Cloud the truth is so sloppily put together, as Tifa wasn't meant to be in the game. Thus, it was meant for Cloud to reveal the truth of himself to the others, and what happened without the Tifa-sized elephant in the room. This may also explain why Tifa is noticeably absent in the Yoshitaka Animo artworks. Aerith and Cloud are pretty much in all of them. Sephiroth, Cat She, and Barret appear, and Red appears in 2. But Tifa, not a single one. Most likely because she was a last-minute addition. Also, fun fact, Yoshitaka Animo's artwork contains an artwork for the main couple for each game. And in this case, it's Aerith and Cloud. Yeah, it's a bit of a confirmation there, but again, I must reiterate this is most likely based on the original storyline. Despite this, Tifa's inclusion is a bit of a saving grace, as because she is Cloud's childhood friend, it allows Cloud and the player to have a personal connection to her, and thus care more about her than, say, any other character in the same placement. Not only that, but having her playable during the beginning part also allows for a much easier time than it being just Cloud and Barrett, especially given the fact that the enemies do increase in difficulty. Having that extra player means that you have extra help, so to speak. So back to the main game, Aerith and Tifa meet for the first time, and one thing I really love is that despite the fact that the devs purposely inserted a love triangle, they ensured that Aerith and Tifa are still very friendly and close to one another, which I admire a lot. Cloud, of course, starts to show his nervousness as he is trapped between a rock and a hard place in Aerith and Tifa, but luckily they get on well. But now it's clear that Aerith and Tifa war has pretty much begun. Let's skip ahead to the battle for the pillar, as we see something which seems to be consistent, and that is Tifa's over-reliance on Cloud. Here, Cloud wants both girls to be safe, and whilst Aerith stays put and eventually goes off to rescue Marlene under Tifa's instructions, as Tifa rushes off to assist Cloud. Again, we see that sort of obedient dog attitude Tifa has, rushing off to her master because she pretty much is dependent on Cloud. She provides some help in the battles, don't get me wrong, and it does go to show that she does care about Cloud enough to do something dangerous, but on the flip side, Aerith is more likely to follow orders, depending on the circumstances, of course, and Aerith also knows of the danger and understands that she must stay behind if there is someone more vulnerable, like a child, then her priorities is on the vulnerable, and I guess in a way this is reflective of the type of character she is. Tifa is physically strong and is more perfected for combat, while Aerith is better at healing and more defensive things, which this moment sort of reflects in my opinion. To add to this, in other moments in the game, such as the rescue of Aerith from the Shinra HQ, Tifa is again the one to run off after Cloud instead of remaining with the others, and in that case it's even more pointless because she should have just been with the others from the get-go. I don't know why she even bothered. Again, this is sort of showing her reliance on Cloud, and it does take away from her independence, but at the same time one could argue she is more likely to run into action blindly and therefore making her somewhat more dependable. After the plate is destroyed, Aerith is taken to Shinra HQ, and it's here that we see Cloud determined to rescue Aerith. Again, despite knowing her for just over a day, Cloud is clearly already going soft on her. He's willing to go on a suicide mission to save her. Now compare this to how Cloud reacted to Tifa and Don Corneo. He's more willing to allow Tifa to fight her own battles compared to Aerith, where he wants to spring into action and rescue her. It's also here that Cloud and co find out about Aerith's past, being an orphan Cetra, who in fact the last Cetra in existence wanted by Shinra after her mother, and her for that matter, were experimented on for their cruel science in the pursuit of a so-called Promised Lands. She also has the ability to know things such as her adoptive mother's husband dying in the Midgar-Wutai War, weeks before a telegram would actually come and tell her what had happened to her husband, and she is often seen by many as very strange because she has very strange and unusual abilities. A few things to note while at Shinra HQ is the obvious factor that Cloud actively wants to protect Aerith, and is taking all precautions to get her out of danger by ordering the other characters to take her to safety. In his eyes, with Aerith's safety being his highest priority, it displays that he does care for her and a sign of a nurturing behaviour. One thing fans tend to note is when they are captured, Cloud is with Tifa as opposed to Aerith. Well, this is because of story reasons and not because of any fan-inspired shipping reasons. For starters, Aerith is important for Shinra, therefore would be isolated, and the others would be pair up in twos. Barrett is with Red, while Cloud is with Tifa, so it's not really anything. But it is worth noting that Cloud is worried about Aerith in this scene, and Tifa is also expressing some concern. She also seems to have some slight jealousy between Cloud and Aerith in this scene if you were to look at the dialogue options, and on another note, Tifa also does try to do some small talk with Cloud. But other than that, there's not really much to say about this scene. I know a lot of people like to pin this as an example of something, but it's not, it's a nothing burger. I guess I could quickly go on about fan perspective versus reality. As mentioned, fans seem to interpret the imprisonment scene as something more than it actually is. But there's a later scene which fans often interpret differently to the actual canonical explanation by the devs and even the scene itself, and that is the Under the Highway scene specifically. There are plenty of Tifa fans who have it in their head that Cloud and Tifa had sex under the Highwind, and to be fair, the way the scene is played out, it definitely seems to suggest so, but it's actually completely fabricated and untrue. Simple fan fiction. Similarly, there are Aerith fans that have even gone as far to claim that Cloud and Aerith had sex while at the Gold Saucer, or even just before she runs away, hence why he dreams of her. Again, this is completely untrue and is pretty much made up in the fan's mind. Fans pretty much want to believe or see things that aren't there, and as I mentioned already, in the end, the devs confirm that neither girl ends up with Cloud. This might also be the reason why a lot of fans have it in their mind that after Aerith's death, Tifa for some reason is now dating Cloud, when that is never confirmed whatsoever. It is a purposeful decision on their end, meaning that no girl ends up with Cloud. The end of the highway scene is a good example of this. The prison cell scene are pretty simple, but is another example of the fans overestimating certain moments for what they are. I mean, just look at the Rebirth trailers. People were going apeshit over the smallest little moments that involved Aerith and or Tifa with Cloud. They were making up a million fan theories. The truth is, fans will over-exaggerate a lot of things that don't actually happen. I'm just pointing this out now because I think it's important to understand that sometimes things aren't the way you think they are. Sometimes it's completely different. Okay, so after leaving Midgar, the story opens up, and thus having insight to the relationship between the three characters becomes more optional, and in some ways more minor. So I'm going to go through some of the highlights I think are important to this discussion. It's also worth noting that after Midgard, despite the players selecting who they want and who they don't want in the party, the game's story technically has everyone with Cloud during the events of the game, so technically it doesn't really matter if you omit either Tifa or Aerith in your selection, because by technicality they're all meant to be there at the same time. Also, it's been confirmed by the devs that Cloud, Aerith and Tifa are in many ways the default three in the party, the ones who are most likely to hang with Cloud during their adventure. So if the group were to split up, for example, Cloud, Aerith and Tifa are more likely to be together rather than Cloud with anyone else. Which in my eyes goes to show how close he is with both girls rather than the other characters, as both Aerith and Tifa are probably the closest to Cloud than anyone else. One of the first major moments is at Calm, where we see the backstory to Sephiroth's descent and Cloud and Tifa's backstory during the Nibelheim incident. We've already gone through this, so there's not really much to talk about other than it's fabricated and it's actually Zack, not Cloud in this scenario. That said, I do find it very interesting how invested Aerith is in this story, and her comments seem to suggest that Cloud and Tifa's relationship is very cute, and she seems very supportive of the two being childhood friends that turn lovers. She, in many ways, creates a little fun romantic scenario in her head and in her dialogue. Another moment of interest is before the Gold Saucer, where Aerith tells the company that she was lonely growing up and gives insight to her emotional well-being, to the point that one could argue that Aerith is actually a very depressed person and uses her jolly persona as a sort of barricade, a facade for her own self. Cloud actually stutters and says that he'll, before changing to we'll always be there for you, showing again how close he cares about Aerith. Now then, let's discuss the big date scene itself, the Gold Saucer date. The Gold Saucer date is a fun extra which you can have with Cloud, going on a date with either Aerith, Tifa, Yuffie or Barrett. The Barrett one being a joke date which actually gives you an achievement if you manage to get it, as it's also the hardest and virtually impossible to achieve. So to get to the Gold Saucer date, I mentioned earlier that there are several optional choices, and whilst I did mention that some having canonical choices over others, there are a lot which are just nothing burgers. However, depending on the choice you make, you either gain or take away points from each of the four, which grants you a date with one of them. It's also worth pointing out that the length of the dates are quite different. A date with Aerith can be up to 9 minutes long, but is for the most part going to be around 8 minutes 30 seconds. But a date with Tifa is at least 8 minutes long and could be shorter or even slightly longer. A date with Yuffie and Barrett are only really 7 minutes in length each. However, the dates are more or less the same each time, just with slightly different dialogue for each one, especially when you're on the cart ride around the Gold Saucer with fireworks blaring. And it also ends the same way, with you discovering that Kashi is in fact a spy traitor working for Shinra. So, because it's only Aerith and Tifa that are important here, let's analyse the dates with these girls, namely the dialogue differences. With Aerith, she makes it clear that Cloud is much different to Zack, and it's revealed that she can pretty much see through Cloud's facade, so much so she wants to meet the real Cloud. She even makes it clear that things are more different than before. Now, remember what I said about young love versus mature love? Aerith at this moment confirms this as true. Her love with Zack was immature and young. It wasn't serious, but now as a mature adult with more rational decision making, she is able to fully understand her feelings properly, and as a result, she basically confirms she has fallen in love with Cloud, meaning her love for Cloud is 100% real and mature. She is serious about it. Tifa, on the other hand, acts very similar to Aerith, claiming the view is beautiful. However, as the two continue their date, we see Tifa struggling to say aloud how she truly feels about Cloud, displaying her nervousness and shyness in confessing her feelings to Cloud. Again, like Aerith, she 100% confirms that she's in love with Cloud, because basically what she's trying to say is, I love you. However, unlike Aerith, and what's interesting is that Tifa even states explicitly that Aerith would have had an easier time saying that she loves Cloud. Tifa doesn't. Instead, she gets cold feet and says nothing. So really, both girls confirm their love for Cloud more or less implicitly, and both, of course, avoid saying I love you to Cloud. One could argue that Aerith was pretty much better at confessing her feelings, while Tifa very obviously is too shy to and doesn't do anything, she just gets cold feet. However, I believe both are intentionally coy, and once again the devs are purposely making sure that things are subtle as to not give the answers straight away. But looking at the two, Aerith's is more interesting as it confirms she sees straight through Cloud's facade and her desire to meet the real him. Now then, let's get into some controversy. What if I were to say that one of these dates are in fact a canonical date? Like with some of the dialogue and character options beforehand, the writers and devs have confirmed that one of these dates are in fact canon. In fact, this particular date was used in the advertisement. It's been used in merchandise and was displayed in an official Final Fantasy display which featured all the mainline couples. But it's not just that, but the game itself even confirms which is the official date. And it's something you wouldn't know unless you looked into the coding or even the dev files at hand. You see, the official gold date is Aerith. It's been confirmed in a few interviews and aforementioned stuffing that Cloud and Aerith date is the canonical date to take place. Even if we look at the time the date takes place, Aerith is marginally longer. Not only that, but the dialogue is a lot more insightful and in-depth to the overall story. In fact, it sort of continues the story and gives us hints to what's going to come later on, whereas Tifa's really serves nothing and is just her stuttering and unable to confess. But the big reveal is in the game itself. You see, as I mentioned before, that each option you have in the game, like whether you buy a flower, give it to Tifa or Marlene, or say that Tifa is your girlfriend or not, all adds or takes away from a secret scorecard. However, the 4 already have points allocated to them. And according to the devs, this is based on Cloud's own feelings on each of the characters. Barrett, from the get-go, has 0 points. Do I really need to explain why? Yuffie has 10 points, which, I mean, Yuffie is meant to be 14 around this time, and it's kind of odd an adult would try to date a child. Tifa has 30 points, which, fun fact, used to be lower at 25 points, but her popularity meant that she was given a slight bump in future editions of the game. But way ahead with the most points is Aerith with 50 points. This means several things. As the devs confirm it's based on Cloud's perspective of the characters, this also is likely to be the canonical choice, but in a casual playthrough, where players know nothing about the characters and are just playing for fun, are going to be more likely to get the Aerith date over the others, as it would require purposely choosing options that put Aerith at a disadvantage to Tifa, which is a surprisingly difficult thing to do, as most choices only remove a single point but adds 2. So picture this, if you are trying to go for the Tifa date on purpose, you'll need to at the very least choose 7 Tifa orientated options. However, there are choices that reward points to both Tifa and Aerith, meaning that both girls will earn points. So given that Aerith is 20 points ahead, this increases her count as well as Tifa's. So screwing up means that you're likely to receive a date with Aerith, and this is also why the Barret date is near impossible, because you actively need to choose options that benefit Barret. Not only that, but some of the options are more strange and random. Like opening a chest in one of the houses in Calm could affect one of the 4 characters and you wouldn't even know. The tiniest action can affect the outcome of the date. Aerith being at such a high advantage means that it's most likely to get and most common dates that players will receive, unless they search for a guide or assume this is what the devs wanted, playing the game multiple times to get a different outcome by selecting different options. Even then, her dialogue and story beats make sense in the grand scheme of things compared to a stuttering Tifa, which goes nowhere. And the actions of Cat Shi afterwards makes more sense that he has the Tablet of the Ancients, something which belongs to Aerith's people, etc. Boy, that was a lot to go through. The next bit to talk about is Cat Shi's prediction of the future. Here, Cat Shi claims that Aerith and Cloud's star shines bright and that the two will have a great future together, which is extremely touching and very romantically implied. However, it's also an extremely cruelly ironic prediction because we all know what happens to Aerith afterwards. It's also worth noting briefly that as the game progresses, Cloud starts acting a lot more strange, and this is of course because he was experimented on for 5 years in an attempt to clone Sephiroth, with Cloud's actions often primarily targeting Aerith as she is technically the most powerful member of the team, and the only one who can stop Sephiroth, so keep this in mind for later. We all know the famous scene in which Aerith dies, and I'm sure most know about the events leading up to it. After all, the scene where she runs off and promises to return, then when things clear up, is rather emotional. It once again highlights her affection towards Cloud, and in turn, Cloud has shown to gain some feelings for her, as noted by how distressed he becomes once she leaves, wanting to rush off after her, which he does so, ironically as she always wanted. Cloud also shows signs of his true self instead of that stoic facade that he's been putting on this entire time. So comes the big moment itself. In the lost city, surrounded by glistening water, atop a beautiful shrine, Aerith prays, communicating with the holy in order to obtain the white material which can be used to thwart Sephiroth and in turn Jenova's plans. In many ways, it's the true main antagonist of the series. Think of Jenova like Morgoth and Sephiroth as Sauron, but that's a debate for another day, and it's completely off topic. Back to the topic, we see Cloud creep up on Aerith. However, the powerful influences of Sephiroth almost gets him to kill Aerith, but he struggles and backs down, controlling himself, unable to follow through with the action. Aerith at this moment in time lifts her head and smiles at Cloud. He seems to have won his battle over the influence of evil and has indeed come for Aerith, showing his determination and care for her. Then, from above, Sephiroth swoops down and kills Aerith. But not only does he kill Aerith, but arguably he kills Cloud as well. Cloud cradles Aerith's corpse and displays a range of emotions from confusion, anger, but most of all sadness. He weeps and holds her close as Sephiroth mocks and belittles Cloud, believing this foul murder was enough to corrupt Cloud and push him over the edge, and then join him in his evil intentions. Cloud, however, manages to be stronger and in this moment of shock proceeds to bite back and stay true to himself, or so we think. You see, Aerith's death was arguably the death of Cloud also, as from this point on he is no longer the same man. He is broken and hollow. I also must point out that aside from Cloud, the only other person that is most distressed over Aerith's death is, funnily enough, Tifa, who appears to be bawling her eyes out over the death of her friend. But Cloud's depression over Aerith's death is so great that it carries on into future events of the game, Advent Children, and the various spin-offs which we will discuss later on, but keep this in mind as we delve into those subjects later. Cloud's life gets turned upside down, and it's only going to get worse as he confronts Professor Hojo and essentially begs for orders as the truth about Cloud is revealed. The experiments, the false pass, everything. Tifa confirms this to be essentially true and even goes as far to say that she will stand with Cloud no matter what. Cloud, on the other hand, is practically hollow from this point on. To give credit where credit due, however, Tifa is the one who does help Cloud remember the past, even though she technically lied to him in the first place, but that's for another time. Tifa is the one that does help Cloud back up. He does get better thanks to Tifa. Tifa is the one who elevates him, who inspires him and gets him to where he is. To give credit where credit due, Tifa is the one who does, in a way, save Cloud during his worst moment in the game. I think one could make the argument that Tifa does indeed care about Cloud, so much so that she is willing to basically help him and save him. She stays behind for him, she actively helps get his memories back, She's basically completely fallen for Cloud. However, it's whether or not Cloud feels the same way for her, which is the real question. Because, I'll be honest, Cloud doesn't seem to interact the same way he does to Tifa than Tifa does to him. It's mostly more Tifa is the one doing all the actions and Cloud suffering the reaction, I guess. So I guess the next major thing to discuss is the Under the High Wind scene. I've already mentioned a few things already, like there was no sex underneath it. That's basically pure fanfiction. However, this scene is often brought up as the most pivotal Tifa and Cloud scene and thus deserves to be explored. Cloud and Tifa are discussing how events are turning out. Things are pretty low at this point. The first part of this scene is pretty much like a dream sequence almost, similar to how Cloud dreamt of Aerith earlier. And both of them sharing a simple moment with each other. Cloud and Tifa are alone, just chatting with each other in a normal and mature manner. They spend the night under the high wind with Cloud wanting to stay in peaceful bliss with Tifa for as long as it takes. However, the pair during the morning wake up and go aboard the high wind to find the company. Here, there's some humor to be had with Sid stating that he saw the whole thing from above, embarrassing Tifa and Cloud. So yeah, I can see why a lot of fans believe that Cloud and Tifa had sex under the high wind. However, it's been confirmed that this didn't happen. Whilst Tifa and Cloud rest their heads next to each other affectionately, and Sid does make a comment which embarrasses the two, there is a lot more going on. The devs confirm that they didn't fuck, but even from a scene perspective, Cloud and Tifa are seemingly falling asleep with each other twice in a row. They sit and watch the night sky and fall asleep once, then waking up for Cloud and Tifa to wish this moment never ends. Then they sleep again under the high winds. The morning comes and they immediately go find the others inside. Aside from the official confirmation that nothing sexual actually happened, I believe what happened was brief but short date the two had. They simply sat next to each other, letting go of their emotions, enjoying a blissful moment under the bright night sky, wishing the day to not end. It's also worth noting that if they were confirmed to have sex, it would go against what the devs were intending to try and do, with trying to be coy and subtle with the love triangle. If they had them fuck, then Cloud and Aerith would also need to fuck to balance things out. Once again, I reiterate, the idea is that Cloud and Aerith share a romantic moment under the night sky, and that they didn't have sex. Sid's comments are playful and doesn't actually suggest anything, neither does Tifa's reaction. It's a humorous scene after what is a slow and gentle scene. Not everything romantic needs to have the characters boning each other, especially given the fact that these characters haven't really established their feelings properly, nor do they date afterwards. Plus, if we apply some anime logic to this, there's plenty of shows and movies where two characters have a simple but romantic time together and are caught by their friends or family despite nothing sexual going on. One or both of them then get embarrassed. It doesn't have to be sexual, with the writers confirming that they didn't have sex. It means that there's more embarrassed that she got caught in a tender moment with Cloud, and considering that Tifa is extremely shy, I wouldn't put it past her that she'd probably cry and whimper if she was caught simply holding hands with Cloud, or giving him a hug. Yes, the reaction is over the top, but considering the game has plenty of over the top reactions, it's perfectly understandable for Tifa, a shy girl, to feel embarrassed by the slightest sign she has been caught in a romantic moment, no matter how big or small. That said, I can 100% understand why people may in fact believe that they did do the deed, as it's portrayed in such a way, but the devs and writers have completely debunked this, and canon is canon. It was a simple, tender moment under the stars and nothing more. But again, I can 100% understand why people may get that impression. One can also use the young love versus mature love argument in the scene as well, with Cloud and Tifa for what seems to be the first time ever actually chatting and having a conversation with each other, enjoying a slow but tender moment, as instead of just bringing up the past of the billionth time, they actually act mature. Only for Tifa to act immature afterwards, but that's irrelevant. Plus, even if they did have sex, which they didn't, wouldn't that also class as mature love? I personally think so. So Tifa and Cloud do stay close throughout the remainder of the game, and plot-wise, she and Cloud are together as Meteor Fall happens. However, Aerith is not finished yet, because she does return. Sort of. Aerith's spirit not only destroys the meteor, but she pretty much saves the day. But she also rescues Cloud and Tifa, with Cloud looking up in amazement and grabbing her hand as she pulls him up with her as Tifa clutches onto his side. Again, reinforces the idea that Cloud, Aerith and Tifa are pretty much the central trio of heroes. However, what is in the dialogue is what's interesting. Cloud, upon holding Aerith's hand, states that he can see her again, that he can find her in the Promised Land, stating this to Tifa as he is rescued by Aerith. This line is what will motivate Cloud from this point on, going to show how almost obsessive he has become with Aerith. And again, it sort of shows Aerith's ability to brighten up Cloud's dim world, giving him hope for the future. What's ironic is the fact that Tifa is literally right next to him as he says this. It goes to show where his main priorities may lie. So I guess after a brief look at the main original game, I can talk about the level of importance. Whilst Tifa is important, she isn't the main heroine. What do I mean by this? Well, every Final Fantasy game works in a rule of three: a main hero, the main heroine, and the main villain. In Final Fantasy VII, it has been said numerous times that the main three are Cloud, Sephiroth, and Aerith. So why is this relevant? Most, if not all the time, the main hero and the main heroine are the main romantic interest. But of course, in Final Fantasy VII, there's no actual way to verify whether Aerith is Cloud's love interest, especially when Tifa is involved and has an equal amount of presence. Plus, Aerith dies, so what gives? Well, for one thing, other Final Fantasy games have included either the main hero or heroine dying, and yet they are still love interests. In some cases, they both die. Take Noctis, for example. Death doesn't mean the end of love, and this will be relevant going forward in the sequels. Secondly, the rule of three exists as a reason for the main story and character motivations. Cloud, Aerith, and Sephiroth are necessary for the story as a whole. Removing any of them breaks everything. They are irreplaceable. However, the same cannot be said for Tifa or any of the other casts. Sure, they are maybe a bit lacking to remove Tifa, Barrett, or the rest of the cast, but the story would still remain the same, to the point that these characters could easily be filled with anybody else. Take Aerith away, the story breaks. Take Tifa away, well, you could just replace her with someone else. In other words, Aerith is far more important than Tifa in terms of story. So, what happens next? Well, Advent Children has some answers. Almost immediately, we are given some big details where Cloud and Tifa's relationship has gone in the sequel. We all know that Cloud and Tifa at one point were living together, and they even adopted a child, this being Denzel. As we can see in this family photo, this looks like your typical happy family, right? Well, no. Despite the fact that Cloud has a great outlook here, he decided to go through the whole going out for milk excuse and straight up abandons them, which is made worse by the geostigma virus, which is degrading Denzel's health and happens to be degrading Cloud's health as well. However, he isn't isolating himself because he's infected, rather it's because he's thinking about other women. Or another woman in this case. As I mentioned before, Aerith's death was not just the death of Aerith, but also Cloud, and Advent Children shows us just how bad her death has truly traumatized him. Cloud lives alone in the church, isolating himself from everyone, simply travelling back and forth, ignoring phone calls and watering the flowers. He is essentially trapped in limbo in a self-imposed exile. Tifa eventually discovers this with Marlene, which begs the question why she didn't bother investigating in the first place, but then again I can see that Denzel's treatment was far more important. But of course, we need some action, and Tifa and Cloud, for that matter, meet the remnants of Sephiroth, essentially more clones, who take them both out. We get a visual of Cloud and Tifa unconscious in a connecting pattern, which I find very interesting. Just look at this. But after this, we get probably the single worst Tifa moment I can conceive. This is the dilly-dally shitty-shally moment. I can't tell you how much I fucking hate this dialogue scene. It portrays Tifa, who is shy and kind-hearted, in an honestly nasty and selfish way. She essentially tells Cloud to fuck your depression, I'm more important, instead of offering good advice or even being comforting. She comes across as a sociopath, and I really hate this interaction. It's insensitive and honestly very out of character for Tifa. I understand she's quite awkward around Cloud, but this is just beyond poor. Luckily, we get a palate cleanser, with Cloud seeing visions of Aerith. He is haunted by her, and get this, Aerith provides better dialogue to Cloud on how to deal with his depression and guilt. She comforts him, watches over him, and even tells him that she doesn't blame him, nor does she believe that he needs to feel guilt. He came for her and brought her happiness. That's all that matters to her. A complete contrast to how Tifa interacted with Cloud, and honestly it kind of goes to show with what we saw previously, in the sense that Aerith was able to bring out the positive in Cloud, whereas Tifa never really does. She just keeps Cloud as is. It's also quite amusing that we get a repeat of what happened at the end of the original game, with Cloud getting lifted upwards by Aerith, with Tifa playing second fiddle again, it would seem. And again, Aerith saves the day, curing everyone from the heavens above, with the movie ending with a touching moment of Cloud looking upon Aerith as she looks back. He has a small and sad smile on his face as she goes back into the light. You may have noticed I haven't mentioned Tifa all that much in this, despite her playing a large role and sharing some scenes with Cloud. That's because, for the most part, Tifa doesn't do a huge amount, except express her worry for Cloud. She seemed to have regressed to the obedient dog, worried for her owner rather than taking proper action and being independent. That said, I do admire and I absolutely love her more motherly role in this. I think that's great, and it could have been expanded upon and would have made her a far more interesting character than the bland dilly-dally shilly-shally bitch. Aerith's role is once again crucial. In death, she is a haunting memory for Cloud and someone he can never forget. So much so, he actively chooses to live in the church and not with Tifa and the kids. And once again, Aerith's actions save the day and give Cloud a glimmer of hope. Now for something honestly depressing about the ending of Advent Children. In the extended cuts ending, where we see Cloud riding off intercut with Aerith in a grassy field, it shows Cloud's desire to reunite with Aerith in the Promised Lands is kicked back into gear. However, as revealed in the script, Cloud is not fully fixed by the end of the film. He is still depressed. He is still hollow. But the script also reveals that Aerith is also sad. In the afterlife, she is described in the script as someone always watching over Cloud, but it also reveals that despite her being with Cloud 24/7, she is lonely. Now wait, you may ask, isn't Zack with her? After all, the film features Zack a lot, so surely he's keeping her company. Good question. The script doesn't answer this. So, theory time. I believe Zack isn't actually in this film, rather it's just Aerith. We see how the Sephiroth clones believe that Aerith's voice is their mother, aka Jenova. Similarly, I believe Cloud is seeing or hearing Zack is just Aerith speaking and Cloud imagining a happy scenario that Zack is in whatever afterlife with Aerith. You see, no other dead character appears in this afterlife. And not only that, but Zack never appeared before Cloud in the original game, thus it's reasonable to assume that, just like the Sephiroth clone, Cloud is just imagining Zack being there. I mean, given that the script confirms that Aerith is sad and lonely in the afterlife rather than happy, I believe that Zack isn't actually there. So the last chapter of the original Final Fantasy VII timeline, or the compilation, is Dirge of Cerberus, which focuses on Vincent Valentine, and honestly, there's not a whole lot really yet. Adds. However, it is known that Cloud and Tifa's relationship is unknown, meaning that we have no idea if they're together or not. Cloud certainly appears less depressed than before, but there's nothing here. Many fans have claimed that Tifa and Cloud did end up together, but like the idea that Cloud and Tifa had sex under the Highwind, this is all just bullshit and simple fanfiction. The devs have purposely left it ambiguous because they prefer the player to come up with their own conclusion. If you want to know a fun fact, however, the devs did at one point consider Cloud and Tifa hooking up in the end. They changed their mind because, get this, infighting occurred between the writers who were conflicted over their belief that Aerith is more appropriate of a companion than Tifa. Similarly, they also didn't want fans to riot over Tifa and Cloud ending up together because so many preferred Aerith. So again, they left it ambiguous to ensure that everyone can make up their own assumptions. They want and keep the peace. Yeah, okay, this is one of the most toxic shipping wars out there, and there's no peace whatsoever, despite the attempts at leaving Cloud's relationship status a blank slate. So in the end, the devs were really thorough with their intentions to make sure that Cloud doesn't end up with any of the two girls. I know some people may find that disappointing by that conclusion, but I cannot stress that it was done on purpose because, get this, it is meant to be for the fans to make up their own assumption, but also because it's meant to be purposely left open. The way I see it is because the player is Cloud in the original storyline, it means that it's all dependent on the player and their choice. If the player prefers one girl over the other, they can make it so. It's up to their interpretation. Therefore, this is not a case of who does Cloud love more, but rather who does the player love more. Now sure, this may be a boring outcome, but the devs specifically stated that Cloud ends up with no one. The games, the movies, all point to this. No matter what, Cloud, Tifa and Aerith never join one another because, as I just said, this is all meant to be left to player interpretation and ambiguous for the sake of ambiguity. One of the most balanced explanations that I can give is that the young love versus mature love argument. I believe Tifa, and certainly to an extent Zack, represents the past and young love. They are more immature and less serious than, say, Cloud and Aerith during the events of the game. I believe that whilst Tifa still loved Cloud, Cloud loved Aerith and vice versa. I can certainly get behind the idea that after Aerith's death, Cloud is broken and struggles to move on for a while. However, I can also see Cloud eventually hooking up with Tifa. Even if it's not in a year or 5 years' time, I can see him slowly warming up to the idea of settling down. But there's some major evidence I'll get to later on that pretty much shatters all of the Tifa and Cloud shippers' dreams because, well, you'll see. But what about the Promised Land, Aerith's loneliness in the afterlife, etc, etc? Again, the devs confirmed recently in the lead up to Rebirth's launch that the original ending was a bad ending, not a happy one. I mean, Advent Children does confirm this already, but it further proves that despite Tifa being alive and well, and Aerith 6 feet under, Cloud is unhappy with the outcome, which suggests to me that devs are hinting that Tifa cannot bring Cloud comfort nor happiness like Aerith brought on to him. And honestly, the more I look into this, the more I think Aerith was the girl for Cloud. The original scrapped storyline confirms this, the coding itself confirms this, the devs all point this direction, and the official artwork, which, by the way, every game has artwork of the main hero and heroine, and a so-called couple shot which depicts Aerith and Cloud as the main ones depicted. Not only that, but if I'm perfectly honest, while researching I found a lot of the Tifa related stuff to be, well, based on fan fiction and false narratives. A lot of the Aerith stuff, on the other hand, contained actual evidence, physical, visual, verbal evidence. Think of it like a court case. Who would win between Tifa and Aerith? Because the judge will go for the girl who has brought all the evidence against the girl who just kind of made stuff up or made assumptions. But who knows, maybe the remakes have something different to offer. Because for the most part, the remake continuity follows the same story with a few obvious changes and a big changing fate plotline, we can safely skip a lot of what has already been discussed, and instead focus on the new additions which may give insight. So first up is a little comment Aerith makes when she gives Cloud the flower. I should note a few things are used to be choices are now just the default, so Aerith gives a flower to Cloud, Cloud gives said flower to Tifa, and Cloud denies Tifa being his girlfriend. All the things I mentioned previously as canonical choices, basically. Anyways, when Aerith gives Cloud the flower this time, she mentions how it symbolizes lovers reuniting, which is a very interesting phrase to use, and given what we know about Aerith and what she knows, this seems all the more poignant. Cloud later gives the flower to Tifa, and we get a chapter with Cloud and Tifa, and can I just say, what an improvement Tifa gets. No longer a bland character, now a fleshed out and interesting character. She still has her shyness traits, and I love how her timidness plays a role in the development of her character in this first part. She and Cloud chat a lot more, and we are given insight to their feelings towards each other, both acting like ditzy high schoolers, twiddling their thumbs and twisting their ankles awkwardly, unable to fully say what they want to say. It's kind of cute, honestly. Tifa shows Cloud the places he'll stay at and the area that their section of the slums is like. Cloud in turn prefers to just get the money and go, rather than stay. But with Tifa, he is willing to stick around a little bit longer. Compare this to how bare bones the original game established the two at the beginning. This is a more developed and gives better insight to their current relationship, in my opinion. We see in later chapters that Cloud often prioritizes Tifa's safety over Barrett or the other Avalanche members, and the game almost playfully has moments where Cloud lands on top of Tifa. Unlike the original game, this game makes you believe that these two have a history and a slight connection. Even the moment where Cloud falls is done better with Tifa clawing her way to try and save Cloud only for Barrett to hold her back, showing how much more determined and desperate she cares for Cloud. However, not everything is roses and sunshine, and another bit that has been expanded on, something which I believe is quite significant when we discuss Aerith, expanded from the original game, is Cloud's seemingly isolation from Avalanche. Again, Cloud is there to just get paid, however the team pretty much don't talk to him that much and omit him from their meetings, which we see Tifa gets somewhat flustered by. And there's a fantastic shot that displays Cloud's isolation, which he is sat alone at the bar as the others, Tifa included, all chat happily and cheer behind him on the tables. So, like before, whilst reuniting with Tifa was great for Cloud, it doesn't take away from the fact that he feels like he doesn't fit in, that he doesn't belong, that he's alone. He even leaves and joins a gang in the hope for something fulfilling. However, one tiny scene which I feel should be brought up is the cocktail scene. Here we see a choice that really doesn't matter what you choose because there's the same outcome regardless, where Cloud says beautiful, which is 100% aimed at Tifa and not the drink. Let's be honest now. One last bit to note about this beginning section with Tifa is that there is a brief cutscene after the 3rd chapter where Cloud and Tifa discuss what can only be described as a date, and the player gets to choose what dress she should wear. It's a sweet moment, although in the end the dress option only affects the Don Corneo section later on. With Tifa's beginning section out of the way, let's begin discussions on Aerith. Aerith and Cloud's time together is increased substantially, with insight to her activities such as helping out at the orphanage and the town itself, showing her selflessness and kindness as a whole. Something worth noting is that Cloud is already displaying signs of his protective nature, whether it's just because of his new bodyguard role or just being protective in general. Also, I love the fact that they show him saving her in a heroic style and suggestive fashion, I should say, just like with how they did it with Tifa on the train. We also see early on that Cloud is willing to go through with things Aerith wants to do, such as picking flowers, helping out some kids. He could easily object, especially as the Turks are on their trail and are more ruthless here than they are in the original. He instead is in staying with Aerith. It's worth noting that the devs have stated that their favourite moment in the game is in fact the time Cloud and Aerith spend time together, and that they also revealed that there's a purposeful difference here with Aerith than with Tifa and Avalanche. Earlier I mentioned that Cloud felt isolated by Avalanche despite the fact that he and Tifa have been reunited. Well, the devs have confirmed that that was intentional, as to compare Cloud's time with Aerith, which shows her taking every moment with him and making him feel included. I must also point out that this wonderful moment after the chapter's end where Aerith speaks to her flowers and sadly states that they don't actually listen to her. And as she walks away, Cloud then talks to the flowers by saying, "Be kind to her." He didn't have to do this, and from what we saw beforehand, it seemingly comes out of character. Yet he does, and honestly it shows once again that Aerith seemingly brings out the best in people, including the hard shell of Cloud. Skipping ahead, it's worth pointing out that there is a slight difference of the playground scene. Whilst most of it is the same, unlike the original continuity, Aerith doesn't play down nor claim her relationship with Zack was non-serious. In fact, she actually goes as far as to name him, something that never happened in the original. Another interesting note is Cloud and Aerith seem to struggle to say goodbye during their playground scene together, the two not wanting to split. Luckily, Tifa passes by as she is about to go on to investigate Don Corneo, and we see a very interesting moment here also. Cloud decides he should just head straight back. Despite the fact that Tifa could potentially be in danger, it's Aerith who stops him in his tracks and forces him to help and rescue Tifa, upon knowing where she's going. This can be interpreted in two ways. Either Cloud fully believes Tifa is strong and capable enough to do things herself, showing his full confidence in her and trust, but on the flip side, one could compare this to how he reacts to Aerith in danger or putting herself in dangerous situations. He is protective over Aerith but seems very indifferent to Tifa, like surely someone who is his childhood friend is more important than a girl that he's just met, right? Unless of course his feelings for one is different to the other. Anyways, Aerith and Cloud have the idea to send Aerith into the wife audition to help rescue Tifa, but they need the money and the permission from the three masters, Chocobo Sam, Madame M, and Andrea. This ultimately leads to the Colosseum battles, and from the way the crowd cheers and even the commentary, they playfully cheer and say things about how Aerith and Cloud are, quote, lovebirds, power couple, and other romantic taunts. This is pretty much means nothing but as it's random members of the crowd, I think, and thus isn't anything substantial, but it does also show how people perceive Cloud and Aerith when they're together. One of the other things to note is the high five throughout this chapter. Aerith tries to get Cloud to high five her, but Cloud, being the massive autist he is, doesn't understand nor take much notice. In another attempt, Cloud is the one to instigate a high five, but the two feel awkward and don't do it. But after the Hell House fight, they finally high five for each other for real, with the two celebrating their victory. This has been noted by many, and even the devs have pointed this out to show the closeness between Cloud and Aerith, gradually going from more Aerith dominated to Cloud wanting to be closer to her, and then finally the two meeting halfway. Soon after this comes a very impactful moment, Aerith dress reveal. Just like the original, there are a few choices, however, these only really affect the dresses of Tifa, Cloud, and Aerith. Canonically, Tifa wears a bluish purple dress, Cloud wears the big black dress, and Aerith has the big red dress, which means that given that we know what the canonical choices are, we know that the scene where Cloud is taken a gasp by the sight of the beautiful Aerith in the red dress is also canon. This reaction of Cloud, lost for words, is confirmation that he finds Aerith attractive, a sign of potential love. In many ways, this scene is similar to the cocktail scene where Cloud almost explicitly calls one of the girls beautiful. And once again, I must bring up the dev's intention of making sure that both girls are treated equally and that the love triangles are dubious, not obvious. Another slight difference in the original is where Aerith and Tifa first meet. Tifa is taken aback when she sees how close Aerith and Cloud are. There's some hints at jealousy. In fact, later on we get a perfect representation of the love triangle where Aerith clings onto Cloud's arm and Tifa is jealous and goes ahead to hold his other arm. I love the fact that the devs team have incorporated this, as it really shows that they are playing with the fans and their interpretation of the girls with Cloud. It's a playful fun that teases the fans more than anything, but it also shows that both girls are infatuated with Cloud. Though somewhat unrelated, I do adore the fact that Aerith and Tifa's friendship is more obvious this time. The two get along really well, and the chapter in the sewers really shows as Tifa's insecurities, worries, and general fear of how things might end up are lessened when she and Aerith chat. Aerith again breaks the mold by cheering her up and gives her hope, just like how she gives hope to Cloud. In fact, this friendship comes back around when Aerith is taken by Eligor and Tifa finds her, quote unquote, after witnessing her tragic and lonely past. It's a sweet moment and shows the two's friendship, and yeah, I just wanted to point that out, how both girls are close and not enemies like some fans seem to interpret. Alright, so there's not really anything massively significant for a while after this, with the next massive moment being the dream sequence. Like the gold saucer date in the original game, there are secret points handed out to the player for one of the 3 cutscenes that can take place in chapter 14. And once again, the point system is based upon Cloud's feelings and thoughts, as well as having a canonical dream. Similarly, Barrett is the rarest, hardest to get, as he starts off with only 5 points. However, there is a difference here, with Aerith and Tifa, both girls being given the same amount of points at 45. This means that it's easier for Cloud to get either girl's cutscene if they please. But this also means there are fewer options in the game that show up. For example, you could have an equal amount of points, but going for Aerith in the sewer chapter first means you'll only get Aerith, and the same will be had with Tifa. So like the gold saucer date, let's analyse the scenes, starting with Aerith. Aerith's scene is very romantically implied, but it also gives hints to the future, like before in the gold saucer. In this dream sequence, Aerith is stood in her garden, which Cloud is surprised by. She says ominously that it may not even be a dream, and she also seems to be actually talking to him. She also states that it's important to be with the ones you care about during your time in life, and states that everyone dies in the end. Then we get probably the biggest moment between the two. Aerith explicitly tells Cloud to not fall in love with her, and Cloud's response is to try and grab her hand, and responds by whether he has a choice in this. Yeah, Cloud practically confesses his feelings to her, and even says aloud that he's coming for her. Aerith turns around, smiles, acknowledging that that is what he wants, then she's happy for him and she's waiting. The moment not only contains a confession of love, though rather implicitly it also shows how much Cloud and Aerith care for each other. I might as well give major spoilers, but the remakes are in many ways tangent timelines from the original. It basically focuses on the idea of changing fate, with Aerith and Sephiroth seemingly being from a tangent timeline, or to help change the fate for their own servings. Aerith saying "don't fall in love with me" just after talking about spending time with those you love and discussing death. This shows that she knows what will happen. She knows Cloud will fall for her, and when she dies, he'll be broken, lost, and a destroyed man. She is trying to heal the pain before it even happens, and tries to encourage him not to fall for her because it will bring him great pain. In turn, Cloud doesn't know any of this, and doesn't know anything about the tangent timeline or alternate history, and thus he feels offended that she would suggest this, preferring to take actions on his own accord, because, well, he has already fallen for her, and wants to save her no matter what. Now let's have a look at the Tifa dream. In the Tifa dream, we have a similar circumstance where Tifa and Cloud meet during the night. Here, Tifa realizes the flower that Cloud had got from Aerith and gave to Tifa symbolizes reunion, and that the flower is now destroyed along with the 7th Heaven bar as a result of Shinra's actions. Tifa's insecurities and worries get the best of her as she cries on Cloud's chest, letting go of a life of pure horror and destruction. Cloud embraces her and hugs her. With this dream sequence, the romance is pretty non-existent. Whilst many Tifa fans have used this scene as proof of their love, once again the devs and honestly common sense have confirmed that this isn't love. Cloud is just comforting a very distressed Tifa. The hug isn't romantic and is just being friendly and a good person in general. The devs also gave a very interesting point of commentary regarding the hug, stating that Cloud is essentially just a 16-year-old in the body of a 21-year-old. He missed 5 years of his life due to being experimented on. He also emulates what other characters do, with the devs confirming that him hugging Tifa is just him recreating what Barrett did after the collapse of the plate. He just copies what other people do. In fact, in the original scene, it didn't even include a hug and just had her crying on Cloud's chest. They actually redid the motion capture weeks later to include it. That said, it does show Cloud is a nurturing person despite the stoic and hard outer shell, and shows that he cares for his friends. So between the two dreams, the Aerith one is certainly romantically inclined, whereas the Tifa one is more for comfort. I also mentioned that, like the Gold Saucer, there is a canonical dream here, and the canonical dream is somewhat spoilt by the dialogue after the dream sequence by the characters. The canonical dream, and the one that makes the most logical sense, is the Aerith one. As I mentioned before, the canonical moments are usually the ones that make the most logical sense, and the devs gave away that the Aerith one is the canonical choice because it hints at events later on, but also it gives reason to why later the characters state that they heard Aerith talk to them, and it motivates them further to go off and rescue her. One key note to the length of these scenes again is Aerith is again the longest with over 5 minutes, while Tifa just scratches 2 minutes long. The Japanese original dubs are also slightly different, but I must admit, I've seen too many different ways people have translated them, so I'm not completely sure what to say. That said, it does appear they are basically saying the same thing as the English dubs, though I have seen the Aerith fans claim that Cloud and Aerith just say to each other, which is the equivalent of a Japanese marriage proposal, but from other sources I've seen, this all seems to be complete bullshit, so I'm just going to put that out there just in case anyone wants to comment on that. So we may as well skip towards the end of Remake and see the Sephiroth fight. Now, technically speaking, there's not really any significant Cloud, Aerith and Tifa moments, other than maybe the fact that Cloud cares more for both girls than Barrett, Red, or any of the other characters. However, given Sephiroth and Aerith are seemingly from a tangent universe, and Sephiroth's big plan here is to entice Cloud to change fate, most likely for his own plans, Cloud throughout the game has encountered arbiters of fate, which are trying to keep things aligned while also suffering from random visions such as Aerith's death. We also see in the end Sephiroth granting Cloud the chance to change and defy destiny, so much so that the two stop fighting, and Cloud goes through with it, saving Zack and Biggs. I will say this as an aside, I do find it funny that he leaves Jesse and Wedge dead, as if he found them too annoying but respects Biggs enough to resurrect him. Anyways, what's so significant about raising two men back from the dead? Is Cloud secretly gay? All jokes aside, if we look at this from Aerith and the Tifa angle, well, okay, not so much the Tifa angle, we can argue that Cloud, knowing Aerith's fate, is determined to change that. He wants her to live, and is pushing things in such a way for her survival. When we see Aerith walking, she senses a living Zack with a comatose Cloud. She pauses as she realizes what he has done. Thinking back to the Cloud's semi-confession of love for Aerith in the resolution scene, he genuinely wants her to be safe and well. We can also look at the original game and timeline, taking note what the devs said about how the original game ending wasn't a happy one, that Cloud would be much happier and satisfied in life if Aerith lives, compared to the fact that Tifa, despite literally being right there, doesn't bring him as much happiness as he desires. Or at the least, doesn't have such a profound effect that Aerith does. So that's pretty much it for Remake, well, except for one thing, the main song, Hollow. But that requires us going into Rebirth and its song, because both are connected and both are about Cloud and one of the girls. In Remake, the main song is Hollow. While revealed early on during marketing for Rebirth, the main song for Rebirth is No Promises to Keep. Both songs are about two people from the perspective of each other. Hollow is, as confirmed by the devs themselves, from the perspective of Cloud about Aerith, written from the point of view after her death in the original game, while No Promises to Keep is written from Aerith's perspective about Cloud, and I must admit, rather surprisingly, also from after Aerith's death, her perspective and feelings for Cloud. In other words, the main songs are literally about Cloud and Aerith, about their relationship with each other, their personal feelings and the perspective they have after the original game's ending. Hollow, as the name entails, is Cloud's feelings and personality after Aerith's death, again hammering home that Cloud is a broken man after the original game's events, despite the fact that Tifa is quite literally alive and well. While No Promises to Keep is Aerith in the afterlife watching over Cloud, remembering the happy times they had together. Both have been officially confirmed to be about these two characters, and both have been described about being about lost love. So yeah, the songs seem to be pushing hard on the Aerith and Cloud angle, and it doesn't stop there, as in the lead up to Rebirth's release, when the song was officially revealed, there came a moment in the music video for No Promises to Keep which shows that, well, for one thing, it's sung by Aerith herself, and it's one moment where Cloud and Aerith meet eye to eye and close in on each other as if they're about to kiss. And yeah, you can guarantee not only were Tifa fans on suicide watch, but Aerith fans plastered this screenshot all over social media. It was even used by IGN when discussing the relationship status gimmick that the game would use. Surely enough, subsequent trailers and teasers ended up showing more Tifa moments similar to the eye-to-eye scene from the Gold Saucer date. Even then, Cloud looks away as Tifa does, compared to the heavily romantic implied scene with Aerith. Of course, these are all in the teasers. More teaser and trailers even revealed Aerith giving the white materia to Cloud, stating that she wants to not just save the world, but more importantly Cloud, while Cloud looks very teary-eyed at her. This is all pre-release stuff, and I'll be honest, me taking such a long time with this script meant that the game actually got released during the production of this video, and so I might as well dive into Rebirth while also skipping anything that was essentially from the original. Keep in mind, I actually don't own this game, and I'm basing everything on playthroughs that I've seen, so if I miss something or get something wrong, apologies in advance. While watching the playthroughs, a couple of things came to mind. A, there's multiple timelines, B, there's the factor of optional versus canonical, and C, the openness of the game. For the sake of ease, I'm going to go through the timelines first. We don't really need to discuss the original timeline, just the remake timeline and the Zack timeline, as I feel like it's important for discussion. Then I will be discussing all the canonical stuff, ignoring all the optional bits until afterwards, as the optional bits, there's like a million of them and only really a few need to be discussed. And also the fact that a lot of fans seem to think that optional means it's canon, when they're not. Take note of the gold saucer date, for example, as that is all technically optional, and all the dialogue options are optional. Canon is a thing that the player is forced to do without option, so anything that is actually canonical is important and takes higher priority in my opinion. I'm also only picking out the significant bits from both girls, so when I do discuss the optional bits, I'll only highlight the positive interactions and discount any negative ones. I'll also skip things which are basically the same as the original. Now, let's finally dive into Rebirth. Spoiler ahead. So starting with the Zack timeline, in a world where Zack is alive, everything else turns to shit. We find out that pretty much everyone else has pretty much been killed or badly injured during the escape from Midgar by a supposed tornado, which was the arbiters of fate at the end of Remake, except for Aerith and Cloud. Zack rescues Aerith after Red sacrifices himself to crash a helicopter carrying her. And almost immediately, can I quickly point out the parallel of Zack cradling Aerith just like when she dies in Cloud's arms? In fact, even the materia falls off and the music plays. I feel like this was an intentional addition, as it's clear how important Aerith is to both boys, and given Zack was Aerith's boyfriend, what does this imply for Cloud later on? I guess you know what that means. Zack eventually gets Aerith and Cloud back to Aerith's home, where he is slagged off by a very angry Elmer, who seems to hate the guy. However, it's here Zack sees a crack in the sky, which seemingly if Aerith from another timeline also sees, and Cloud does later on at the end of the game. Zack takes care of Cloud and Aerith. His time is spent worrying about the two people he cares most about. However, it's here that we get a very cute interaction with Marlene, but we also find out that Biggs is alive and well and is also helping out. Marlene cries about the fact that everyone is dead, but Zack promises to fetch Biggs to cheer her up. So far, we've not really seen much from the Zack timeline, but I promise you there is quite a bit that will come out in a few more moments. When Zack and Biggs meet, they both reveal how they survived the impossible, both seemingly about to meet their ends, only to survive against all odds. Mostly thanks to the whispers. However, it's here that Zack and Biggs talk about Cloud and reveals that they are not talking about the same Cloud, rather two different Clouds. We also find out that time is acting weird, which makes sense as Zack and Cloud managed to turn up when the main cast left Midgar, which technically speaking makes no sense from a timeline's perspective. They also discussed the purpose, as Biggs has no idea why he, of all people, was saved, and Zack feels like there's more going on, and that they should determine their own path. So far, I've just given a basic overview of the Zack timeline, and there's not really anything thus far about the relationships. However, when Zack returns to Aerith's house, he visits Aerith and Cloud again to check up on them. And it's here we get a massive revelation from Marlene, of all people. Marlene is worried about Aerith and Cloud, as Zack tends to the pair. Here, Marlene makes an interesting comment. She states that Aerith still sleeps because of Cloud, which gets Zack curious. She goes on and reveals Aerith's death from the original game, then proceeds to say that Aerith really likes Cloud, and that Cloud makes Aerith happy, possibly confirming that Aerith loves Cloud, and in front of her ex-boyfriend Zack, of all people. This confirmation to Zack doesn't enrage him, but rather he gets more invested and curious. He goes on to a mission to save Cloud, to save Aerith. He seemingly accepts the fact that Aerith loves Cloud and is willing to move on to save them both. But because Biggs is planning something big, he gets sidetracked. As Zack becomes conflicted with what to do, save Biggs or get Hojo to save Cloud and Aerith, he reflects on his conversation with Marlene, where Marlene ends up being asked by Zack whether Aerith does in fact love Cloud. Something which only doubles down with what we've been said before by Marlene, as she goes ahead and says yes, she does love him. Zack finds out that because he wasn't there, and slips away to rescue Cloud and Aerith. fully accepting and acknowledging that he is no longer the man in Aerith's life. This is one of the main reasons why I love Zack. He is so carefree and kind that he actually accepts the idea that his ex-girlfriend loves his best friend now. He accepts rather than becoming resentful and bitter. He is just a perfect man. If only he was the main hero, eh? Speaking of which, remember the rule of 3. I like how Marlene basically just confirms the structure to Zack, and in many ways this completely castrates the Zack and Aerith shipping completely. Cloud is eventually awoken by an excited Aerith, but finds everything so strange. Cloud is struck by the oddity of the events, but Aerith puts her finger on his lips and says it's basically her dream in a way. Now I'm going to stop talking about the Zack timeline for a bit and go through the main story. The reason why is because what comes next basically is near the end of the game, and I'd rather discuss the key Aerith and Tifa points throughout the actual game itself before these significant exchanges. As the game starts, we are shown the Nibelheim incident again, where, to my surprise, even a lot of Tifa fans, there's basically nothing to do with Cloud and Tifa infused whatsoever. It's kind of shocking that they never took advantage here, especially as later on we see a lot more with Cloud and Aerith in terms of canonical storytelling. In most playthroughs it seems just the same, and just slightly expanded upon from the original. Although Cloud's mum certainly gets more attention, my assumption is it's technically Zack, not Cloud here, so it's less personal. But I will say it does sort of confirm that Cloud believes Tifa was dead all this time until he meets her 5 years later. So while in Calm, we do see once again the closeness of Tifa and Aerith, with the two being best friends, with Tifa massaging Aerith and the two girls sharing the same bedroom. However, it's in this bedroom something quite interesting happens. Tifa asks Aerith what Cloud has been up to for 5 years, which even Aerith thinks is strange for her to ask, but Tifa's response seems to suggest that she believes Cloud will open up on Aerith more so than herself, which again goes in line with what we know from the original story. Truthfully, Cloud does open up more to Aerith than Tifa. It is also more interesting that Tifa reveals that Cloud was never in Nibelheim in the first place, revealing the twist straight away to Aerith. Ironically, Tifa also opens up more to Aerith than others. Tifa during the night wants to talk to Cloud in private. However, he gets visions of Sephiroth, who mocks him into thinking that Tifa is either a delusion or something else. Tifa and Cloud talk on the rooftops, but Cloud seemingly accuses Tifa of being an imposter, as she shows her scar to prove that she's real. By the way, it almost looks like she's flashing him, which is kind of amusing. Tifa snaps back and demands where Cloud was for 5 years, and the conversation puts a massive strain on their relationship. Quite the opposite if they were completely in love. The way this ends is interesting also. Tifa thinks that the two could just move on and everything would be fine, again highlighting her naive and almost childish personality. But Cloud's response is very mute and lacks any sincerity. Again, rather shocking how blunt and seemingly lacking in care about her or her feelings. Quite the opposite to what we're trying to find out for this particular video. Staying in Calm, everyone seems to be all over the place doing their own things. However, we get our first interactions with Tifa and Aerith. Optional interactions, I might add. The differences are interesting, as Tifa's interaction seems more just reminiscing about the past, while with Aerith she's more proactive and wants to explore with Cloud. A subtle but interesting difference from what I can observe. Climbing the clock tower, Aerith and Cloud will hang out and try to find where Midgar is from the tower, similar to the conversation with Tifa during the night. However, there's no hostility here. Rather, she's actually just asking about Cloud and Tifa, having a genuine interest, while also stating that she wants Cloud to not take Tifa for granted, seemingly knowing how mad the night went, but Shinra troops arrive interrupting the peace. Cloud and Aerith are together as they sneak past the soldiers. When they arrive back to the others, she claims she and Cloud were on a date, kinda. And this is like the scene in the train graveyard. It flusters Tifa, and Cloud looks somewhat embarrassed as Aerith announces this aloud. Meanwhile, Barrett just tells them that it's the last date they can have for a while. It is amusing seeing in the background Cloud looking back and forth between Aerith, who is clutching his arm, and Tifa, who is staring gobsmacked. Again, showing that both girls have a thing for Cloud, and he himself seems to have feelings for each girl, but is too embarrassed to show it. After Calm, the world opens up, and Cloud and co go and face a giant snake, only for Cloud to get sucked up into the swamps and witness Sephiroth. Both Aerith and Tifa are distressed by Cloud being taken down. However, what's interesting is that Aerith is the one who's more concerned and wakes Cloud back up. Tifa awkwardly just stands there. That said, a criticism I can levy towards Aerith is that she's acting very much like a cheerleader throughout this game. She mostly jumps up and down and yells support for Cloud, which is nice and all, but it goes to show that her support doesn't really go by much, if I'm honest. Like, she's almost suffering from the same problem that Tifa had in the original game, where Tifa was just a yes man or yes woman. And here, Aerith is in that sort of position. She's just a cheerleader. That said, it does seem from many scenes that, canonically, Cloud, Aerith and Tifa often hang out with each other more than the other characters with Cloud. I think that kind of makes more sense on a grand scheme, in my opinion. In Dawn, after rescuing Yuffie, Cloud visits the girls. He hears Aerith talking to an unknown man, which is actually Red, and Cloud gets somewhat jealous of this, wanting to know who she's speaking to. This becomes sort of a running gag, as in the Gongaga, and during Tifa's Gold Saucer date, Cloud feels some sort of jealousy over other men with Aerith, hinting at his own feelings. He also visits Tifa in a room where the two have a longer, more heartfelt conversation, with Tifa reminiscing about Nibelheim, in particular one of the random villagers there. Tifa clearly wants to open up on Cloud, but is quite shy. In return, Cloud seems off-puttish and not really wanting to discuss things further. However, it's clear as the two are behind the door that Cloud does want to open up also. Of these two meetings with the girls, Tifa is far more romantically inclined. However, it does show that Cloud and Tifa's main issue is that neither of them are confident enough to open up on each other, but at the same time, both do want to open up on each other. They're just waiting for the other to make the first move. As they attempt to infiltrate Shinra, Cloud, Aerith and Tifa are once again the trio together, and something amusing is that Aerith and Tifa seem very playful around Cloud, even having no real issue getting changed pretty much near him. Both even pose to impress Cloud. After a while, they set off to Costa del Sol, and while on board the ship, Aerith and Tifa have a personal conversation in secret before Aerith mentions that the two should discuss quote-unquote business, which is actually about boys. Though the conversation is cut off, I'm almost certain both were about to discuss Cloud. Maybe neither knew that was who the other was about to talk about, or maybe they do, acknowledging they're both after the same man. While on the cruise, Cloud goes and plays the card game called Queen's Blood. Both girls have reactions to the game, and Cloud is competing. Tifa is very competitive and looks forward to a match with Cloud, while Aerith just wants to have simple fun. In Tifa's match, she seems to be very eager to beat Cloud, while Aerith seems more supportive, displaying the difference of both girls. We later see this difference of both girls as Cloud rises upwards in the game. Tifa is seemingly against Cloud when Red appears in disguise. Meanwhile, Aerith is fully supportive of Cloud no matter what. It's somewhat surprising to me to see Tifa somewhat hostile towards Cloud here. At the Costa, Aerith and Tifa are both the ones who initiate the idea of taking a break at the beach. Therefore, both are purposely being suggestive when we see a scene which in my eyes reflects the Aerith red dress scene and the Tifa cocktail scene, where we have Cloud visibly flustered by the girls' appearance in their beachwear. I say girls because whilst the advertisement for the game seemingly indicated that the only one that Cloud was flustered by was Tifa and her big coconuts, the game implies that with the relationship status that both girls flustered Cloud and were pleased to see him. Again, this suggests that he has some sort of attraction towards both girls. Unfortunately, Hojo is there and begins to cause trouble, with Cloud choosing whether to assist Aerith or Tifa. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter, as it seems no matter what, everyone gets captured by Hojo in the end, except for Cloud and Yuffie, and Johnny to an extent. That said, what comes after is what I find really important to observe. As evening comes, Cloud can visit any of the characters, and we get some cutscenes. With Tifa, he visits her by the bar, where they reminisce about Midgar and the Seventh Heaven. However, very interestingly, Tifa mentions moving on, something which I think is very interesting considering what we know in Advent Children. Once again, Tifa is regulated to simply talking about the past, and I swear, this is literally all she and Cloud ever fucking talk about. Like, can she and Cloud just get some new material already? I swear they have no other thing to talk about other than the past. It is literally just the past. Remember this, remember that. It's actually getting beyond a fucking joke by this point, and I'm kind of getting really annoyed with these two. They have no other chemistry whatsoever. I know I'm going on a tangent and all, but Cloud and Tifa's conversations throughout every piece of media can be summarized as remember this, remember that. They literally have nothing, absolutely nothing. No chemistry. They literally just have nothing but the past, and that is all. At least with Aerith, the conversations can vary from one topic to another. Hate to say it, but this is just getting way too embarrassing. And I'm sorry to rant about it, but it is getting very, very annoying. And it's getting tedious having to talk about Cloud and Tifa every time when all they do is just talk about the fucking past. Anyway, with Aerith, the two are by the sea. Aerith reveals to Cloud that she has dark thoughts on taking revenge on Hojo for what he did to her and her mother. Cloud, if we choose the most positive options, and by the way, that is the most that I'm going to do with this because I don't really want to choose any of the other options, says to her that it's fine to have those dark thoughts once in a while. Let it be. In fact, he even explicitly states that while her thoughts are ugly, she is not, basically calling Aerith beautiful. He then tells Aerith that the two can start thinking about the future, with Cloud stating that he'll be there for Aerith no matter what. The two then share more moments together by walking as Aerith talks to her future self, then tells Cloud that he'll love her when he meets her, perhaps foreshadowing. Once again, the Aerith cutscene is the longest cutscene, and given the context for later on, it's the one that makes the most sense. In fact, throughout the game, the constant teasing of the two girls trying for Cloud's attention is often played for laughs. However, some fans have pointed out that a lot of the time Tifa seems to copy Aerith. This kinda goes in line with the original game's Gold Saucer date, and that Tifa is lacking confidence and acknowledging that things would be easier if she was Aerith, and so Tifa basically copies Aerith to try and get Cloud to open up, smile, and do more. At the Gold Saucer, I find it interesting that when Cloud has a vision of Sephiroth, Aerith is the one to take him out of it, holding his hand and getting him out of it. She tells him to get some rest, and moments later, Tifa parrots Aerith by telling him to rest. Once again, Tifa is basically copying what Aerith does. It's also here that Katshi, whose name is pronounced wrong as Kate Sith, gives Cloud and Barrett a prediction. The prediction was in the original as well, and this one is the one that gets to Cloud, and it's more story orientated. Basically, Cloud is told that he will lose something most precious, and does that ring a bell? Well, spoiler alert, it's something that happens right at the end of this game, and happened in the original. Later on, we get a scene that can change depending on the character. With Aerith, things are fun and light-hearted, even when she sees a picture of Jessie on one of the walls. She ends up talking to her as if she can sense her, despite her being dead. Tifa is more slow and cautious, and that awkwardness is back. With the Jessie picture, she gets visibly upset, and Cloud comforts her. Of the two moments, I have to say the Tifa one feels more emotionally driven than the Aerith one. Alright, so nothing majorly significant happens for a while, so let's skip ahead to the desert scene that gets picked out a lot. Here the team find Barrett after he went missing, and while they're following a vulture, sandy tornadoes erupt from the ground and almost swarm our heroes. However, what's significant and what is often talked about is Cloud immediately goes over to protect Aerith, holding onto her and keeping her safe. He doesn't do this with any other character, which in my eyes once again displays how much more protective he is of her than basically any other character, especially when you have someone as young as 14 years old in Yuffie or the similarly small Red or Cat She. Later we find ourselves at Zack's home place in Gongaga. Now I neglected to mention this above mainly because in my eyes there wasn't much to add, but to Rebirth I feel that there's much more to add as they have a connection to Zack and both end up feeling more awkward around his homeland. Cloud feeling that he's been there, and Aerith, well, you already know. It's also interesting that Cissnei is here, as I'm sure many people have thoughts about her and Zack. I've seen arguments that Zack and Cissnei were much better as a ship than Aerith. Funnily enough, in the original Crisis Core, Zack and Cissnei hang out and have more heartfelt moments towards the end. If we were to look at my young love versus mature love argument, I think there is a case that could be made for Zack and Cissnei. The fact that she still lives in Gongaga and is no longer a Turk shows her loyalty, especially in comparison to Aerith, who blatantly doesn't find her relationship with Zack all that important. Cloud eventually follows Aerith around Gongaga where they meet Zack's parents. Cloud lies to his parents about Zack, while Aerith makes a comment about Zack being charming, but also states that she probably wasn't the only girl in his life. A nice callback to Zack's flirtatious behaviour in Crisis Core, and also the fact that Aerith previously stated that it wasn't anything serious. Aerith can tell Cloud has something hidden, and Cloud can tell that Aerith is quite emotional about Zack, despite everything. Cloud once again comforts Aerith, and here Cloud asks her if she still likes Zack, to which Aerith rather playfully acknowledges what Cloud is trying to suggest. When Tifa enters the fray, she seems to already know what Aerith was looking for, and here we get a rather odd scene in my opinion. Here, Tifa seems somewhat disappointed that Aerith couldn't find Zack, or any communications from him, but proceeds to look at Cloud as if she feels that this means that Cloud is ripe for the taking by Aerith. But then, after that, Cloud looks at Tifa and says that Aerith should probably forget about that loser, because he left her in the cold. A rather shocking comment which can only be described as jealousy. Of course, both Aerith and Tifa scowl at Cloud's really horrid comments. He then doubles down and almost states that Zack's dead before suffering a migraine. As Cloud walks off, we see Tifa comfort Aerith as Cloud looks over his shoulder as he feels he should tell Aerith the truth, which ironically I feel Tifa has just done for Aerith at this moment. So during the battle with Scarlet, we get another significant moment, and something which I find fascinating when compared to the original. For starters, we see once again that Aerith seemingly is more concerned with Cloud's well-being at the start of the fight, but afterwards come It's the interesting bit. Sephiroth comes as a vision to Cloud as he savagely murders all the Shinra troopers to rescue Tifa, but then he ends up snapping and almost killing Tifa, believing her to be a Jenova delusion. In the original, it was Aerith who bore the brunt of Cloud's sudden aggression and volatile moments of delusion when being tricked by Jenova's mind control. Here though, it seems Tifa is the victim in all of this, and what Cloud mentions about Jenova taking on the forms of anyone, including his enemies, but more importantly his loved ones, well, this obviously suggests very obviously how Cloud feels about Tifa. Upon snapping out of it, Cloud's mortified by his actions, whereas Tifa has her Evangelion moment within the giant materia, seeing visions of the past before seeing Sephiroth trying to kill her, then Cloud walking off with him. Again, it shows her love for Cloud even in a moment of absolute isolation and terror, thinking about him and her desires and dreams she had. And like in the original, Cloud is being manipulated into attacking someone he deeply cares about by killing or maiming them. So by trying to kill Tifa, it's affecting Cloud's emotions also. Afterward, Tifa begins speaking about the past for the gazillion time. However, this time she realizes her memories were fuzzy, and by experiencing what it's like to be Shinji Ikari in episode 16 of Evangelion, she realizes Cloud was always there for her, and she just didn't realize it. Cloud rebuffs and hates the idea of being called a hero, especially as he just attempted to murder her. Cloud admits that he feels that there's multiple people inside of it. As the conversation is about to close, Cloud and Tifa edge closer to each other as if about to kiss. Funnily enough, outside of the room, Yuffie and Cat Shi are literally saying kiss, kiss, because, well, come on, they are a cunt hair away. But more importantly, Aerith is there too, and she mouths something to Tifa, which Tifa smiles and nods at. And what she says is unknown, but I have a feeling it's something to do with Cloud. At the Cosmo Canyon, we get a similar scene to the one in the original where all the characters are together around a fire. Cloud speaks with Tifa, and in the best option, will say that she wasn't bad on her speaking, that she did her best. More importantly, story-wise, is the Aerith speech. Here, Aerith speaks about being the last ancient, but halfway through she stops and looks at Cloud. Logically, the option is for Cloud to encourage her, which motivates her to finish her speech. For me, the Aerith one is more caring and romantic of the two. It's also worth noting that Aerith's one is integral for the plot, whereas the Tifa conversation is not. After the speech, the town folks of Cosmo Canyon let off a bunch of fire lanterns, and Cloud steps forward and stands with Aerith. Aerith jokes that her speech was pretty sappy, and she meant every word. And given she was looking at Cloud, I feel like a large part of her speech was directly at him. Returning to Nibelheim, it's interesting to see Tifa assist Cloud when the going gets tough and he sees a vision. This is probably the first time that I've noticed this, as most of the time it's Aerith that's the one that's helping Cloud. While at Nibelheim, we get another moment with Aerith as she climbs the water tower, and in a scene similar to the backstory of Cloud and Tifa, Aerith sits and Cloud answers her questions, then gets a bad headache, which Aerith apologizes for as she accidentally brought up the past. Cloud sits next to her and guides her to various locations of the town. Aerith teases Cloud that him keeping guard and watching Tifa from the water tower, something which Aerith claims she probably would have done herself. Talking to Aerith again straight after shows that she's not angry at Cloud, but at everything, and she tells Cloud that all her life she's been lonely and feels some jealousy towards Cloud having known Tifa since childhood, whereas Aerith has had no one. Cloud reassures her by stating that he can listen to her, and he doesn't mind if she lets it all out, again showing compassion for letting her be honest. The conversation with Tifa is once again just reminiscing about the past, and I cannot be bothered to constantly list everything Tifa does, so I'm just going to skip it. Anyway, Cloud gets a vision and he remembers Zack. Here Zack wants to talk to Cloud about girlfriends, hinting to Cloud about Aerith, talking about how beautiful she is, depending on the angles apparently. It's also interesting that Zack brings up Cloud having a possible girlfriend at Nibelheim, but gets nothing from him. While Zack can talk all day about Aerith, it's also here that Cloud fully remembers Zack, or at least it seems that way. As Cloud goes to the reactor, he has a flash of Zack again, believing Zack died when they fell into the river, which we all know isn't true. He snaps at Tifa and accuses her of knowing the truth and suppressing it. Tifa tries to comfort him and essentially lies to him to keep the false beliefs he has to himself. Cloud then says that they should tell Aerith, but we see the consequences of lying as Tifa immediately puts a stop to that idea and states that only she would tell Aerith because she's close. This harkens back to the issues in the original game where Tifa lies, and it causes bigger issues later on. It's clear that if she lets Cloud babble to Aerith about Zack, then Cloud will just feed a false narrative that Tifa is only helping to push, rather than dissuade. She even states at the end that just to keep it between the two. I mentioned many fans of the series have accused Tifa of being manipulative, and one of the forms of domestic abuse is manipulation. And the truth is, it definitely seems that whilst Tifa is trying to keep Cloud in an open mind, her tactics are poor, only creating larger holes and making things worse in the long run. I'll be honest, I do think an argument can be made that Cloud believing a false narrative and Tifa just lying and allowing the narrative to spread somewhat displays how the two are pretty toxic to each other. Think of Saul Goodman and Kim Wexler. Whilst they certainly got on with each other and were very close, together they're poison. And we know later on in Advent Children just how bad and how dire the consequences are. It's food for thought. Tifa has her own PTSD flashback as they enter the inside of the reactor, and it's quite sweet of Cloud to comfort her and give her a hug. Ultimately, this kind of contrasts with Tifa then comforting Cloud after he also suffers a vision. A nice touch, even if this is like the only time that Tifa basically does this sort of stuff. Back at the Gold Saucer, it seems Aerith becomes interested in the stage play, and Cloud catches her writing a song, which is the main theme song. And if she needed inspiration, well, she looks at Cloud, and Cloud is that inspiration. Also, interestingly, Cloud is resting, and as he turns, he sees Aerith in the Zack timeline laying in a bed beside him. Once again, we should bring up the Gold Saucer dates, as yet again the players are forced to try and get one on the girl over the other, with a visible affection rate for all the characters. Aerith and Tifa are usually by default the highest, and the two dates between Aerith and Tifa are the same length of each other. The dates are similar to the original, with there being a stage play and the actual dates themselves. I'll be honest, the Aerith date is more or less the same as the original, and as I pretty much figured out, the near kiss that they had leads to nothing. The two are awkward about it, but they both care for each other. Aerith even rests on Cloud's shoulder, and they hold hands, interlocking their fingers. And she once again states that Cloud is different from Zack and she is able to move on. The Tifa date, however, is very much different. Gone is the awkward stuttering, and in its place is a radical change. And in its place is perhaps the most romantic date of them all. Cloud and Tifa share a lot of thoughts on one another. Things get more heated as they hold hands. Then, when the fireworks are blasting, we get the first official time Cloud actually kisses someone. That's right, Cloud and Tifa kiss. This is massively significant. Up until this point, Cloud has never expressed explicit feelings for anyone, not in the original games, not in the spin-offs, not in anything. This is the first time that Cloud has ever explicitly shown feelings towards her, and this is the first time that Cloud and Tifa basically kiss. This is the first time we can confirm for the fact that those two are in love with each other. No other time has it really been confirmed. There's been hints, sure, but it's never been officially confirmed. This is basically bona fide confirmation, right? Well, it's been discovered what happens when you max out all the relationship statuses with all the other characters, and once again the canonical date is Aerith. Even when all the characters are maxed out, Aerith is the default. I do wonder if there's a secret point system like the original that pushes Aerith forward. That said, even if we ignore this, a majority of the dates have Aerith as the Rosa character in the stage play. Only Yuffie and Tifa's date don't have this. Not only that, but the devs and the game itself end up giving away the fact that the Aerith date is the canonical choice, thanks to the end credits of the game, revealing that the Aerith date is the canonical one, and once again, the theme song is by Aerith about Cloud, so once again the Aerith date is canonized by that. I also must reiterate a massive important point. If something is canon, it's often because it makes the more logical sense plot-wise. The dates themselves range from fan service in the Tifa one to joke dates at the Cat She one, or in Aerith's case, one that actually follows the flow of the story. Whilst the Tifa date is 100% more romantic and has a goddamn kiss in it, the truth is it's not fitting narratively. And it's pretty much isolated within the date itself. It doesn't get brought up again, and there's nothing really to it. Even then, an argument can be said he only went in to kiss Tifa because, as he puts it, Aerith prefers Zack, and thus he believes that he's not her desire. Plus, we wouldn't call Yuffie, Barrett, or Red's dates canon because they all have heart-to-heart with Cloud, would we? It's also important to stress that the dates are optional. They are not necessarily 100% canon, which means that the kiss itself is optional. It's not canon. So just because there's a kiss doesn't mean it's important to the story. Let's be real now. The kiss obviously is optional, just like the near kiss with Aerith. But between the two dates, I won't lie, the Tifa one is definitely the winner here. It is definitely more romantic. However, and this is the big problem with it is unimportant to the narrative. And as I mentioned above, it's basically just fan service. The Aerith one has meaning to the plot line and the story as a whole, and let's be honest now, given what comes afterwards, the Aerith one makes way more sense. And as I mentioned with the rule of 3, if you were to remove Tifa from the situation and replace her with Yuffie or Aerith, nothing would change. If you replaced Aerith from her dates, things would break. It wouldn't make sense at all. After the date, the whole crew gets wrapped up in the Colosseum battle with the return of Don Corneo, but what's significant is the end. As they all celebrate, Aerith and Cloud high-five straight away, which contrasts the awkwardness in the first part of the remake. However, Tifa also joins in this time, high-fiving Aerith like it's nothing, but getting a high-five from Cloud. In my eyes, it shows a massive character growth from Cloud as he interacts with both girls. He's becoming more confident around the two. This does bring up a point a lot of people make, and as I briefly mentioned already, Tifa does copy Aerith a lot, and this particular scene definitely shows this. Aerith does something with Cloud, Tifa parrots it. She doesn't really have any autonomy at all, which, you know, does kind of degrade her a bit in my eyes. Skipping ahead as they search for the black materia, Cloud starts becoming more and more like Sephiroth, and almost murders Alina. However, what's interesting in the scene is who managed to snap Cloud out of it. Aerith screams his name, and usually she's been the one to snap him out of it. But this time, it's Tifa. She grabs Cloud and manages to snap him out. Later, all the characters suffer visions of their traumatic past. Tifa sees Nibelheim burn and her father's death, while Aerith sees her lonely childhood and her mother's death. Interesting comparison is that both lost a parent and both are psychologically scarred. The difference is the way they handle it, with Aerith bottling it up, while Tifa becoming a trauma dump. Aerith's speech after the trials is very significant, as she lifts everyone's spirits and tells them not to dwell on the past, just to let it go. Forgive yourselves and focus on the future. If only she told Tifa that, because at least then we'd get some more interesting dialogue. Unfortunately, Cloud's seemingly possessed, and he is very rude and abrasive towards Aerith after her speech, before seeing a vision of Sephiroth who mocks Cloud, telling him to give in to the rage and hatred. Sometime afterward, Cloud, having taken the black materia, ends up getting it taken from his hand and thrown away by Barret, which ends up in the hands of Sephiroth. We get another important moment regarding the two girls. We get Cloud taking hold of the black materia again, where both girls end up tackling him, getting it off of him. Here, Tifa tackles, while Aerith takes the materia. The way Cloud interacts with the two, albeit under possession, is intriguing. He shoves Tifa aside very violently, but does nothing towards Aerith, but politely asks for it back. Although saying that, he does sort of stalk her, and he does seem very creepy in this way. But he doesn't have any aggression compared to how aggressively he treats Tifa in under possession. As Aerith is cornered, she states that she's there for Cloud, which for me is similar dialogue used in the dream sequence in Remake. Again, Cloud gets the materia, but doesn't show any aggression. Soon, Cloud snaps out of it and he witnesses Aerith being attacked by whispers. He realizes she's about to fall and he rushes over to rescue her, grabbing onto her, as Sephiroth cuts the branch and sending the two falling, with Cloud holding onto Aerith as they fall together. It's interesting that despite the fact that he's about to get the black materia, well, Sephiroth has got the black materia, his priorities are with Aerith. He's preferring to save her life and risk the rest of the world, basically. So let's return to where we left off with the Zack timeline. As here we have Cloud and Aerith together as they go off for a walk, with Aerith telling them not to look up because of the massive scar in the sky. Cloud retorts with a jokey comment and smiles at her. It's fascinating to witness Cloud interact casually to Aerith, and even smile for that matter. Hell, a lot of the time whenever he's smiling or seemingly saying some jokey comments, it's often with Aerith. I've never really seen it with Tifa at all. As the two walk, Aerith playfully pushes Cloud to the market in the slums and begs him to buy her something. Cloud notices her weird behaviour but continues to follow along, picking out which the player gets the choice to pick one. However, the shopkeeper swindles the pair and instead gives Cloud a badge with flowers, similar to the lovers' reunion flower from the first remake. As Cloud continues to find these things very odd, and even the shopkeeper says something very morbid and odd, Aerith grabs hold of Cloud's hand, and what I find very interesting, and this is something that you need to watch very closely, is how Cloud goes from seemingly being dragged by Aerith to straightening himself up, then walking hand in hand beside her. Approaching another shopkeeper who is selling candy in a bizarre circumstance, the shopkeeper says the same dialogue and doesn't even allow Cloud to have what he wants, rather offering a new candy creation. However, unlike the jewelry, Cloud seems to be more accepting and less grumpy, taking it and eating it even if it was absolutely terrible. But again, the shopkeeper says something very morbid at the end, which is once again very strange. As we get some very confusing timeline, wishy-washy, whatever, as Zack is up against a whole platoon of Shinra troopers, similar to the end of Crisis Core. Then he finds Biggs, who ends up getting killed, but then fights a bunch of troopers again before jumping off and ending up in front of a church. Aerith and Cloud continue their little date, but Aerith notices the black feathers of Sephiroth, where he delivers a line that seemingly gives us a reason to the strange nature of the gloomy shopkeepers, with many of them accepting their fate. Aerith snaps out of it, and once again Cloud notices something. And it's here we get something pretty major. Despite it not being a kiss, Cloud and Aerith hold hands and smile at each other before seeing a photographer who wants to take the cutest couple photo, which both Cloud and Aerith partake in. In a humorous moment, both Cloud and Aerith get mad that they don't win the cutest couple award. Now compare this to how Cloud would have reacted in any other way in the past. Instead, he fully accepts Aerith here, and has no qualms. Once again, getting a Cloud and Aerith confirmation, but this time more subtly from Cloud. Cloud still desires to know what's going on, but Aerith wants to tell him at our spot, quote, which is the church, the same place Cloud would live later on in Advent Children. As their conversation begins, Cloud mentions a next time with Aerith, which Aerith acknowledges as a confirmation of where they stand. Aerith then basically just tells Cloud that she loves him. Okay, she says really like, but let's be honest, we all know what it really means. Cloud still asks what's going on, but instead Aerith hugs him, to which Cloud cuddles her back. Now given that Cloud hugged Tifa in an optional cutscene in the first remake, and here he is hugging Aerith in a canonical cutscene, yeah. The two stay like this for a while as Aerith tells Cloud not to blame himself before thanking him. She then takes off her pink ribbon and gives him the white materia, claiming it's about saving the world and him, before thanking Cloud for everything. She then pushes Cloud into a magical pit of sorts as Sephiroth marches into the church behind her. Boy, was that massively romantic, and boy did it confirm their feelings for each other. But what's more interesting is my observation is, did you notice how all the pro-Aerith and Cloud stuff was all canonical and non-optional? Like, this was stuff that was in the story and that you had to watch. Whereas pretty much all, if not most, of the Tifa stuff seems to be optional. Despite Cloud and Tifa kissing, there's nothing more than optional stuff. Whereas this is all non-optional. You have to go through it. You have to have the characters literally confirm their love for each other, and it's amazing to see, despite all the things you can include Tifa in, Aerith seems to always come out on top. Again, I reiterate that all the optional moments with Aerith tends to be more canonical choices, and tends to affect the future of the plot, and tends to have meaning behind them. Whereas the Tifa stuff doesn't go anywhere. Yes, Cloud and Tifa kiss, but it led to nothing. And in many ways, all these moments afterwards kind of make a mockery of the Tifa kiss, highlighting its unimportance and, well, let's be honest, now fan service. Do I really need to remind you all of the Rule of 3 again? After falling through a vortex of realities and having a deep conversation with Sephiroth, Cloud finds Aerith again, his voice very relaxed as she pops out of nowhere in a mysterious forest. And it's here we might as well bury the Tifa date once and for all, as Aerith says to Cloud to focus on himself, the real him. Dialogue which is only available in the Aerith date, once again confirming her as the canonical choice. Unfortunately, if you've played the original game, this scene might be very familiar, and we all know where this leads. So let's talk about the ending. The ending has scratched the heads of many players as well. What the hell actually happened? We see Cloud save Aerith from death, but then suddenly things don't seem well and Aerith dies in his arms. Or does she? as we see Cloud seems more upbeat after her death, and then we see her help Cloud in the final battle, where we get a very suggestive scene of the two standing back to back and holding each other's hands, their fingers interlocked with one another. Even Aerith's death sequence shows Cloud and Aerith cradle each other's face and the two lean into each other. But again, is Aerith actually dead? After all, she seems to be there fighting with Cloud at the end. Sephiroth sees her, Zack tells Cloud to rescue her, and not only that, but as the others surround Aerith, Cloud tells her to wake up, and she does just that. She sits next to him at the very end. Well, unfortunately many have pointed out, and honestly I kind of believe this theory. What we're seeing is a very depressed and distraught Cloud deluding himself into thinking Aerith is alive and well. He thinks he saved her. He thinks she's just out cold during the battle with Genova and Sephiroth, and thinks that she's woken up and she's herself again. However, pay attention to the other characters. No one seems to acknowledge this. Tifa is bawling her eyes out and is very depressed. Even big tough Barret is crying. Yuffie isn't energetic, and Red sees that something isn't right. Cloud is acting like an outlier. He has deluded himself into thinking Aerith is alive and well. He is smiling goofily at her. He seems to see her, but no one else does. Tragically, this goes back to what we see in the original continuity, where Cloud cannot live without Aerith. Losing her is too much to bear. He has lost himself. And this rebirth ending suggests that he has indeed lost himself. His mind, the woman he holds dearest to him. This is the extreme of losing someone you love. Simply put, by the end of Rebirth, Cloud has become hollow. However, at the same time, something which I find very significant at the end is we see Aerith interacting with Red. Somehow Red can sense her. Perhaps only those who have an extreme connection can sense her. Cloud is obvious, but Red seeing her is honestly kind of weird, especially as we also see a depressed looking Tifa right next to him and Yuffie crying her eyes out, with Sid seemingly not knowing who Aerith is and asking the others about her, despite the fact that he had interacted beforehand. Red may be able to sense her because he's an experiment, but also because of his connection with the planet. The two also got on very well, so maybe she's alive, or maybe she's in a different universe, maybe she's alive in some other world, who knows, it's very confusing. In the very final shot, we have Cloud and Aerith saying their goodbyes, Aerith staying behind as Cloud ventures on. We see that Cloud is smiling and promises to defeat Sephiroth, while Aerith says she'll stop the meteor. Now keep in mind, it's highly likely that Aerith is dead. This is Cloud's delusion, that he genuinely thinks everything is fine. We see how the materia he holds corrupts in his hand, and perhaps it's all insight to his mental decline. Hell, even the crack in the sky starts to appear. I will say this final shot and conversation seems very romantically implied, and I am the only one who's getting Zack-like vibes from Cloud. Just like Zack 5 years before, he promises to return to Aerith, and the two share a heart-to-heart, clearly wanting the best for each other, despite the fact that in all likeliness, she's gone. It's also worth noting how little Tifa plays a role in this final part of the game, how more focused on Aerith it is, for very obvious reasons, but even after her death, Aerith is still more important for Cloud. I've even seen both sides state how surprised they are at Aerith and Tifa. Aerith fans were surprised that Tifa seemed to be given more to do, but at the same time, Tifa fans noticed how Cloud and Aerith's optional moments made more sense in the grand scheme of things, and how Cloud and Aerith had a lot more canonical moments. So the remake continuity is really a mixed bag, all things considered. On one hand, there's plenty of additional content for both girls. Both have been certainly upgraded from their original. Admittedly, it felt close at times. So close, in fact, I couldn't even pick one over the other. But looking at the remakes from the full picture, you come to find the story is more biased towards one girl over the other. And it all comes down to one thing: optional versus non-optional. I can say Tifa is certainly improved here, but my god do I hate the fact that her and Cloud are so stale with their conversations, all of it being about the past and nothing more. Tifa gets an upgrade, certainly, the kiss scene and the hug scene, as well as several moments where she and Cloud clearly care for each other. However, as I mentioned already, a lot, if not most of these Tifa moments are optional. In fact, looking at it from a grand scheme or grand picture, Tifa's moments, for the most part, 90% of them were optional, with 10% being basically non-optional, and most of those could be considered, well, two looking at each other awkwardly, talking about the past, or Cloud trying to kill her. It's never explicit either that Cloud nor Tifa actually love each other, whereas with Aerith, it's actually explicitly stated by Marlene, Aerith, and Cloud himself. It's also helped that Aerith's scenes seem to be more canonical in the grand scheme, whereas the Tifa stuff, not so much. And Tifa stuff seems very much optional, I should say. The Aerith stuff, non-optional. Unlike the original game series, you can't really escape the cutscenes or the plot-relevant points. They're close for sure, and I'd argue more close in the remakes than the bland representation in the original games. At least that's with Tifa. But again, I don't know, I feel like Aerith has won this one. Aerith seems to have more romantic interactions with Cloud, and all of them are very much canonical. Very few are optional. The few that are optional are basically like the dream sequence of the Cold Saucer date. And when you consider the fact that most of the Tifa stuff are all optional, yes. The biggest issues with Aerith I find is that she can be too cheery and too much of a cheerleader, and I'll be honest, a lot of the stuff with Aerith can be very cryptic at times, whereas Tifa kind of feels very much, oh yeah, we're kissing, we're hugging. So between the two, despite the improvements for Tifa, I certainly think there are massive positives, but I have to go with Aerith here. It makes more sense narratively, and I find her and Cloud's moments to feel more touching and romantic. It also helps that it's mostly non-optional and canonical scenes. It's explicitly stated the two love each other multiple times, and yeah. That's it for the remakes, so let's go on to the spin-offs. I'll be honest, if you're more of a Tifa and Cloud shipper, well, this section of the video is certainly not for you if most of the other video hasn't been for you in this first place. Because, if I'm perfectly honest, Aerith dominates the spin-offs. First, let's look at Kingdom Hearts. In an alternate turn of events which smashes the worlds of Final Fantasy and Disney together, it's known that the events of Final Fantasy VII took place more or less the same, up until Aerith's death, where, according to the manga for the game series, Cloud leapt forward and pushed Aerith out the way, preventing her death. But this also had the added consequence of Sephiroth also surviving the events of Final Fantasy VII. As a result, Cloud is essentially locked into an eternal battle with Sephiroth. In some dialogue and in some character bios, we get a hint that Cloud is trying to protect something or someone as he travels the lands alone. In the end credit scene, it shows us the very person he's protecting, Aerith, with the two reuniting again, which is seen as a happy ending in the game and perhaps a hint of a sign of their relationship. Now, one thing I will point out, which is amusing, is that there is actually a fan theory or meme where fans claim that Sora is the illegitimate child of Cloud and Aerith because they have the same hairstyle as Cloud and hair color of Aerith. It's amusing, but I will want to point this out right away. It is not real, but I just felt like pointing out because it's quite amusing. What is real is this gives us an insight to what life where Aerith survived would have entailed for Cloud. It's clear that she is still on his mind, but now that she's alive, he is very much protective of her, and the way things seem to go is that he goes off on his own adventures but returns once done, like someone off to work and returning to their wife almost. Though not confirmed, it is implied Cloud and Aerith have some sort of relationship in Kingdom Hearts. One could take away the fact that the two would have been living happily together and comfortably if she didn't die. Of course, there is still the threat of Sephiroth and others, but Cloud is calm and knows that she's safe, and thus he is far more in a better settled mind. As one may have noticed, I spent time talking about Cloud and Aerith, and given Kingdom Hearts has plenty of Final Fantasy characters, most from Final Fantasy VII itself, you'd think Tifa would be there. Well, she isn't. She doesn't appear at all. The sequel, however,
Tifa appears in Kingdom Hearts 2, but unfortunately she doesn't really do all that much. She's mostly looking after for Cloud and asks where he is. She does join him in battle, but that's about it.
Aerith also returns, and like before, she more or less stays behind. However, just like the first game, she and Cloud reunite, with Aerith claiming that she can see the light in Cloud, and that he must fulfill his goals, knowing that he'll return to her. In turn, Cloud wishes for her to stay behind for her safety, promising to return to her no matter what. Cloud Aerith being understandable, I should say, and cheering for him. Again, sort of being regulated to being the cheerleader. So with both girls interacting with Cloud, the one with Aerith is more heartfelt compared to the one with Tifa. Tifa is more or less just a fighting partner than someone Cloud is actually trying to protect and Aerith on the other hand has slower, more tender moments. It's also rather amusing that, just like the original compilation, Tifa is depicted as always chasing after Cloud, while Cloud is always chasing after Aerith. It's like a conga line of sorts. In fact, at the end credits of the romantic couples, which features plenty of Disney princesses, princes, and other couple characters, want to know who else appears in the couple credits? Cloud and Aerith. They appear in the montage with other couples, all but confirming in Kingdom Hearts that Cloud and Aerith are an official couple. That said, there are other Kingdom Hearts games, but just know that Tifa doesn't appear in any. Aerith and Cloud do, but it's more or less the same of I want you safe sort of deal, so let's go on to Dissidia next. In all Dissidia games, Cloud and Sephiroth are playable characters and appear in the games during the cutscenes. Tifa does also appear as a playable character in O12 and NT, while Aerith and Tifa appear in the mobile exclusive Opera Omnia. For the most part, there isn't much interaction, however there are a few highlights. In the original Dissidia, Cloud faces Sephiroth, however he has a line of dialogue which has raised a few eyebrows. Cloud, upon Sephiroth leaving him be, he mentions that he would prefer finding someone else. The game also stresses the importance of crystals in the game, with Cloud's crystal being Aerith's white materia. Though Aerith does not appear, Cloud's happy ending is him in a sunflower field, which he and Aerith were in during the dream sequences, while holding the white materia, displaying that his dream is to be with Aerith. There's a possibility during the Dissidia timeline he may have found her in the Promised Lands. In the prequel 012, here Tifa is saved by Cloud during the events of the game's story. Cloud then begs the Cosmos to protect Tifa and keep her safe, an inverse to what we see in Kingdom Hearts. It also displays his priorities of wanting Tifa to be safe more than anything, showing him having a more affectionate side. Dissidia also shows a sort of balanced POV for Tifa and Aerith. Despite Tifa appearing more than Aerith, hell, Aerith doesn't appear in most of the games, yet she plays a massive role in the first game, with Tifa playing somewhat of a passive role in the prequel. That said, Cloud's determination to keep her safe and his more comforting side is shown, but alas, this is pretty much the last time that Tifa has anything worth noting when it concerns the spin-offs. Well, with the exception of a few things. In Ever Crisis, which for the most part retells the original Final Fantasy VII, it also has character stories. In the Cloud story, we see the events between Crisis Core and the original story. We see once again Cloud's determination to impress Tifa as they meet for the first time in years, and despite how bad and shapy he is, he tries to create the facade that he is a first-class soldier who lives a confidential life that Tifa cannot know about. Essentially, he's peacocking to enhance and impress Tifa. Of course, into believing the story and sound impressive, something a teenage boy or child would do to get a girl to think he's the shit. We get some further hints to their closeness by the fact that Tifa advertises Advance and tries to get Cloud to join. Cloud states that he will join, but there will be a cost, but because Tifa's there, he's willing to downplay the prices. Ever Crisis also has events, and many of the events are based on times of the year, such as Halloween, Christmas, summer, and or something quite significant for this analysis, Valentine's Day. One to note is how Cloud and Aerith are often paired up during these events. In fact, during the Final Fantasy IX anniversary, Cloud and Aerith received costumes. Cloud represented Zidane, and Aerith represented Garnet, both characters being the central love interests of that game. Just an interesting insight to how those characters are presented and how Cloud and Aerith are presented as being those lovers. It's just rather interesting in my opinion. Yet they could have had Tifa wear a Garnet costume, and yet they didn't. They chose Aerith. Very interesting. As alluded to, the Valentine's Day event had an interesting story where Aerith, Tifa, and Yuffie worked together to cheer Cloud up for the Valentine's Day. A common theme among many of these spin-offs is the idea of Cloud trying to find the Promised Lands, the same place Cloud wants to find Aerith. This is often pointed out by other characters, and the dialogue regarding his adventures is interesting and similar each time. I guess this brings us nicely to Final Fantasy Tactics. Next, to see something very interesting. Here, Cloud meets a random stranger who happens to look very much like Aerith. Cloud stutters as he sees her, and he's said to be sad as if he lost someone dear to him before he moves on. He also expresses a desire to go to the Promised Lands, again reinforcing his motivation after the original game. In the game Airborne Brigade, we have possibly the biggest confirmation of Cloud and Aerith being the main love interests, as not only was it advertised during the events for the game, but in the game itself it displays Cloud and Aerith getting married on the date, the 1st of June. Which, to add to this, was celebrated over a year later by official accounts. In fact, Tifa is present also. as a bridesmaid. That said, Airborne Brigade does allow players to have Zack and Aerith marry, as well as Tifa and Cloud hooking up. However, it's worth noting that the animation for Cloud and Tifa seems oddly hostile, with Tifa trying to pull Cloud along as Cloud frowns and shakes his head. There's also a Christmas event that features Cloud and Tifa together making a Christmas tree, but let's be honest now, nothing compares to the fact that they actually had Cloud and Aerith marry each other. It's really not good for Tifa. In World of Final Fantasy, Cloud and Tifa both appear as some of the characters in the game. However, it's the dialogue and actions of Cloud who's more important. Cloud is once again searching for the Promised Lands, and he once again is going after a seemingly resurrected Sephiroth. There's one particular scene I'm very interested in, and that's the scene where Cloud is talking to Terra. Here, Terra argues with Cloud over him abandoning Lightning to deal with Mirage as he pursues Sephiroth. As they argue, Cloud then says that Sephiroth took someone away from him forever. Terra argues that killing Sephiroth won't bring the woman Cloud lost. Then Terra mutters the following words: "This isn't the way to honor her memory, to take your love for her and turn it into hate, especially when it makes you abandon your friends." This all but confirms that Cloud loved Aerith. This also neatly ties back to what we saw in Advent Children. Cloud's love for Aerith and his inability to move on has blinded him and prevented him from having a happy life or sticking with his friends, or even hooking up with Tifa for that matter. All this confirms where Cloud's heart truly lies. It's funny because whilst Tifa appears more in these spin-offs than Aerith, hell, even Zack appears more than Aerith half the time, Aerith ends up playing a massively vital role in almost all these spin-offs, and their relationship with Cloud seems to be a highlight far more often and more insightful ways. Tifa often doesn't do much and is more or less just there because of recognizability. And in terms of relationship with Cloud, there's nothing. There's genuinely nothing. None of these spin-offs had anything with Cloud or Tifa, compared with Aerith, who, despite barely appearing, has a profound impact. To add to this, the dialogue and stories all reference Cloud and Aerith in a romantic way, with terms like love and marriage. With Tifa, these terms are absent. She often feels like she's tacked onto these spin-offs more than anything, just because, well, she has big titties and fans like her. That's literally the only reason that I can think of. Look how useless and pointless she is in Kingdom Hearts or Dissidia. And then you have Aerith, who barely even appears and yet has a profound impact and actually makes sense being there. There's a reason why I barely mentioned Tifa, because there's nothing to talk about. Aerith, on the other hand, there's explicit mentions of love and even a fucking wedding. Overall, Aerith wins this. This section of the video is pretty much dedicated to any of the other stuff that's worth noting, but I just couldn't really fit it anywhere. Let's first talk about regional preferences. Regional preferences are where certain regions of the world, or even countries, have a preference over one thing over the other. For example, if we look at Evangelion, and they're shipping war with Rei and Asuka, Rei is far more popular in Japan, while Asuka is far more popular in America. Similarly, from my research, it seems Japan is far more in favour of Aerith, while America is far more in favour of Tifa. These differences may not seem like anything, but it actually plays a large role in advertisement, and even how fans perceive these characters. Hell, even Let's Players, the way they play games, will be completely different depending on the region. Hell, very recently with Rebirth, there was a lot of Japanese fans who were complaining about Westerners only choosing Tifa options and neglecting the Aerith stuff. So, regional differences do exist. Once again, if we look at Evangelion, because Rei is far more popular in Japan, there's far more merchandise of her than Asuka, and even the rebuild of Evangelion films concentrated more on her than Asuka, who, let's be honest now, got kind of sidelined in those films. Which may be why more US fans may have been more upset that Asuka was seen so little in these 4 films. Similarly, Aerith is featured a lot more in advertising and events than Tifa in Japan, while American trailers and advertisements featured Tifa more heavily. Regional perception creates bias towards one girl over the other. In fact, even going online, I've noticed a far more Japanese fans concentrate on Cloud and Aerith fan art than English fans. English fans tend to concentrate more on the Cloud and Tifa fan art. Again, regional differences. People may not find this all that important, but it's an interesting point, and may add an explanation why I feel there's a massive divide between the two. Speaking of regions, localization could also provide some clues. It's been noted that German translation of one of the books described Cloud and Aerith as lovers. Similarly, another Japanese book described Cloud and Aerith as lovers. but there is a lot of noticeable moments during Rebirth and Remake that show a lot more romantic implied dialogue from Westerners with Cloud and Tifa. Again, that regional difference could mean that different cultures find different things different. Similarly, certain actions by characters can mean different things in different cultures. It's been said how Cloud and Aerith interlocking their fingers is often a symbol of love in some places. Now, although I mentioned looks don't matter, and I do want to quickly go over something that is interesting, and that's about the character designs, and how their personalities are radically different. Aerith is very traditional. In fact, if you were to use the term tradwife, like the tradwife meme, Aerith would be the perfect example. Her clothing and design are very traditional, and even the fact that she prays is very traditional as well, if you really think about it. Meanwhile, Tifa is more revealing with her clothes and often more exotic. Not only that, but her fighter playstyle is apparent from her design. However, this is where things get interesting, as both girls contradict their appearance. While Aerith may seem more traditional, she is more likely to go into battle head first. She is brave and confident. Tifa, on the other hand, is quite timid, shy, and has dreams that are quite literally just being a damsel in distress. She is the complete opposite to her fighter style. Think of it like this: if both girls were butt naked fighting a pit of mud, Tifa would obviously win because she's physically stronger. But at the same time, Tifa would be extremely worried and scared to do so. And Aerith, on the other hand, would throw in the first punch and encourage Tifa to just do the same. The contrast in looks and personalities runs throughout Final Fantasy VII, with characters like Cloud being the main hero, while also showing displays of selfishness and the whole backstory being a lie, as well as having no personality nor being able to save the girl he loves, ultimately having no happy ending. Ironically, the perfect hero is Zack, but he dies before the events, and yet he displays everything that Cloud isn't. Simply put, Final Fantasy VII is all about subverted expectations. Something rather interesting about the advertisement for the original game is that, once again, it confirms Aerith and Cloud as the main lovers. It displays a shot of characters and moments from the game with tags, and when it shows Cloud and Aerith, it displays the words love, which once again seems to point out that Aerith is the main love interest, and given the original story and the context, it makes sense. So let's quickly talk about other characters. For example, Vincent Valentine and his relationship with Lucrezia. Whilst Dirge of Cerberus gave us nothing in terms of Tifa and Cloud and nothing for Aerith at all, however, I find it interesting that Vincent's love story with Lucrezia is similar to another pair of characters. Vincent was assigned to protect Lucrezia as a Turk bodyguard, and yet he fell in love with her. Unfortunately, the relationship ends in tragedy, with Lucrezia ending up in a weird sort of limbo afterlife and Vincent cursed with immortality and loneliness. Now tell me, which two characters does that sound like? Cloud and Aerith in comparison to Vincent and Lucrezia is very similar, with Cloud being Aerith's bodyguard, then potential lovers, only for it to end in tragedy, with Cloud ultimately living a life of loneliness forever, it would seem. Hell, just look at the two pairings. Lucrezia and Aerith look very similar to each other, and were involved in one way or another in Shinra's science division, Aerith being basically experimented on while Lucrezia being a scientist, while Vincent and Cloud have the spiky hair and both worked for Shinra beforehand before ultimately being betrayed. Ironically, both Cloud and Vincent were also mutated by Professor Hojo in his cruel experiments. Let's return to the idea of young love versus mature love, as I feel Rebirth managed to add more points to this in my eyes. I mentioned before that I theorized Zack and Tifa represented young love, while Cloud and Aerith represented mature love. Rebirth practically confirms my theory. Zack, once told by Marlene that Aerith loves Cloud, doesn't react badly, instead he accepts it. Aerith herself makes a comment that Zack wasn't fitting and was always flirting with all the other women. He wasn't as important. Aerith sees Cloud as different, and the two even discuss their future. Compare this to Tifa, whose only conversations are always stuck in the past. Basically, Tifa is the past, Aerith is the future. Finally, let's rediscuss the official artwork for the game, which confirms Aerith and Cloud as the main love interests of the game. Again, keep in mind Tifa wasn't created yet, and this is mostly from the original story, but the fact still remains that we still have artworks, multiple in fact, of Aerith and Cloud, including one of her death, which means that Tifa wasn't even conceived by the time that Aerith was being made the one who dies and not Barrett. Again, as I mentioned before, all artworks from previous and future games include couple images, and well, here's that couple image for Final Fantasy VII. So we finally made it. Time to conclude this analysis. I have studied all the key moments I feel are worth noting, and anything else I'm just gonna go off script now, because I want to go off script and talk about the advantages and disadvantages of Aerith and then Tifa, before making a final judgment overall. So sit back, relax as I go through what I think of the two girls. So let's start with Aerith first. Aerith from the get-go, for one thing, all the official artwork, all the official music, all the official stuff point towards Aerith and Cloud being together. It's pretty hard to miss all that. It's also worth noting that a lot of the non-optional canonical moments were always featured with Aerith and Cloud in mind rather than Tifa. The fact that the point system in the original game put Aerith above everyone else quite a large portion, I think, shows it. The fact that, Aerith is also, let's be honest, not the main girl, not Tifa, her powers and her ability to communicate with the planet and all that. The fact that Aerith also, has a lot of impact in a lot of the stories. The spin-offs, for example. I mentioned, Aerith basically dominated that field because a lot of the spin-offs all felt like they were focused with Cloud trying to find the promised land or trying to protect Aerith or do something, and it would always have Aerith there. The fact that one of them had the two get married, and also one that I forgot to mention was there's an advertisement for some sweet treats in Japan. They have the main couple as Aerith and Cloud once again reinforcing that idea. There's all sorts of stuff pushing towards that. Aerith is also a lot more of a character. She's more colourful, she's more bubbly, she's more excited, more friendly and sweet and all that, which is why it really sucks when she gets killed, because, she's one of the more colourful characters compared to everyone else. Her story is tragic, but at the same time, there is that uplifting beat to it, and you see this with the way she interacts with Cloud. Cloud is very stubborn, very, I'm serious all the time. A lot of people joke that he's autistic, and let's be honest, he does act like it. But Aerith always brings out the best of him. She, whenever he's around her, she always makes him smile. She always makes him, chuckle a few times. There's always something positive that comes out of it. You don't see that with Tifa at all. And so I think Aerith succeeds in that department. However, the flaws with Aerith is that she is definitely a cheerleader. She is way too much on Cloud's side all the time, always cheering for him. I accuse Tifa of being like that in the original game, but the truth is, Aerith very much so feels like that a lot of the time. She doesn't ever seem to snap at him all that much. She does, snap at him on the occasion, does talk back against him, but when she isn't, she's acting like a cheerleader. A lot of the time, Aerith's stuff is also very much cryptic and never really explicit. She says in Rebirth, I really, really like you. Why can't you just say the fucking word? Why can't you just say love, And yet, we all know what's actually going on. It's painfully obvious just why act all, coy about it. But saying that, really the flaws with Aerith are very few and far between, As I said, she acts too much like a cheerleader at the time. She acts way too cryptic, and it gets to the point of beyond parody. I think at the same time, she's not really utilized all that much physically. A lot of the time, stories revolve around Cloud wanting to be with her or not wanting to see her again, but we don't actually ever see her appear physically or do something physically. It would be more interesting maybe to have that connection. I quite like that idea in that one game, Final Fantasy Tactics, where there was that flower girl who is 100% the exact same as Aerith, and it could have brought out something interesting that maybe you see this new person, maybe you could protect that person, prevent it. But I don't know, I feel like that she is somewhat underutilized as well, whereas Tifa is used a lot in the spin-offs. But overall, her flaws are few and far between, whereas a lot of the positives really outmatch the negatives, in my opinion. I guess another problem, actually, come to think about it, is sometimes she can be too bubbly, to the point that a tragic event could take place and she would just be, laissez-faire about it. People point this out with the Jessie Raspberry poster. She acts very, not necessarily mean-spirited or cruel anyway, but she acts very, I don't know what the best word is, she acts very whimsical about it, you know, and obviously she probably could see Jessie, can talk to the dead, you know, she's like that. The way she handles grief and all that is different to other characters, but at the same time it comes across as very shallow sometimes, you know, admittedly that is kind of a bad thing, you know, a bad thing could happen, she'll be like, oh well, you know, other characters will be like distraught about it, which I've never really liked that sort of side of things, but again, you know, given the type of character she is, given what she is, etc., it makes sense. So, you know, again, few and far between overall. I think the good outweighs the bad. So for Tifa is the childhood best friend of Cloud. Right away, you know, her and Cloud have a connection because they have a history with each other, whereas with Aerith, there's no history whatsoever. You know, the history is being made in the games itself, rather than, you know, with Tifa and Cloud, there's already history and there's already a past to them. Cloud is very protective of Tifa, just as much as he's protective of Aerith, but also, unlike Aerith, Tifa is very explicit with the fact that she is in love with Cloud. You know, she does love him. And Cloud, you know, he has some hints here and there, but it's never truly explicit with him. You know, that's more of a Cloud problem, not a Tifa problem. But I digress. You know, Tifa does genuinely care about Cloud, and she is shown to be, you know, willing to want to be with Cloud. She tries her best to try and help Cloud throughout these bad moments. You know, I may have mentioned, you know, she's a bit manipulative, but at the same time, she is the one trying to help him when he does, you know, have his massive mental breakdown. When he does, you know, try to isolate himself from everyone else, she is the one that tries to bring him out of it. And we see in Rebirth, you know, she is able to bring him out of some of the worst parts of himself. But the other issues that come across, however, with Tifa is that a lot of her moments are optional. A lot of Tifa moments are optional, and as a result of being optional, majority of the Tifa stuff is stuff that fans want to believe are couple bits, but really are just optional moments that aren't canon whatsoever. Whereas a lot of the Aerith stuff is canon and, you know, set in stone, so to speak. Tifa has a few moments, you know, the Under the High Wind scene, for example, is definitely springs to mind, is probably the number one example. But when the devs then turn around and say, no, they didn't fuck, and no, they don't end up together, you know, it kind of just neuters that relationship, really. The big issue with Tifa, I find, has to be the obvious problem of her potentially being poisoned for Cloud. I mentioned comparison between Kim Wexler and Saul Goodman. You know, I didn't say Jimmy, by the way, who, you know, Saul's real name is Jimmy in the show, because Saul is sort of a different character entirely, and Saul didn't really come about if it wasn't for the fact that Kim and Jimmy both sort of worked together doing some scams here and there, and also, you know, tricking and bypassing their way through the law system. Saul wouldn't become Saul, so to speak. And I feel it's very similar here, where despite the fact that clearly Cloud and Tifa do care about each other, clearly Tifa 100% loves Cloud, whether or not Cloud feels the same way about Tifa is a different question. They're poison for each other. They are absolute poison for each other. It gets quite hard to justify these two being together because they lie. You know, they live lies. You know, they don't ever tell the truth to each other. They don't ever open up with each other. And, you know, even in Advent Children, when Aerith is dead, when, you know, they've got adopted children with each other, they still can't just open up with each other. They just live apart, and it just ends with Cloud driving away in the end. You know, he doesn't stay with them. And, you know, it really goes to show, you know, because they live a life of complete lies for the most part, it feels very much like the two just are poison. Like, they cannot be together. They cannot at all be together. They are venomous. They are poisonous. They are toxic to each other. You know, because Tifa just continues to let the lies happen, continue to let the past, you know, be brought up, but make it different. Cloud suffers even bigger and suffers more later on, whereas Cloud, in turn, ends up making Tifa suffer because he is also sort of encouraging false narratives to try and get Tifa to... How do I put it? Get Tifa to try and, like, you know, see the world from his perspective or try to live his fantasy when reality is it's not happy. So, you know, I feel like the problem with Tifa is that manipulative side, that toxicity between the two. It's hard to justify the two being together because they are bad for each other. You know, again, I like to use that Kim Wexler, Saul Goodman comparison, you know, especially at the end when, you know, she screams at him, you know, the only reason why she did it was because it was so much fun. You know, it's the same here. The only reason why she wants to do it is because the fun of the dream of being the damsel in distress that Cloud can rescue. But the truth is, you know, they're bad for each other. And that's the big issue for me, as well as the fact that most of her stuff are optional, and the fact that she's very bland. Like, she is so fucking bland. Like, the fact that the only conversations that her and Cloud have are remember the past, remember this, remember that, it really is bad for her. You know, like, it's kind of a big opposite to Aerith, because with Aerith I could speak about all the positives and the negatives weren't really that massive, but with Tifa the negatives are so massive that the positives end up being nudged out. Like, sure they kiss, sure they hug, sure they, you know, the end of the Highwind scene, and yes, it's very implied, but of course it didn't happen in the end. Yeah, I'm afraid it's just not really all there compared to Aerith. So, with everything now looked at, and from a full picture regarding 3 characters, I believe 100% the main love interest for Cloud Strife is, if it wasn't obvious enough, Aerith. When considering the fact that the original plotline, considering the story of the games, the movies, the spin-offs, and considering the fact that the majority of the canonical and non-optional scenes or parts of the games involve Aerith, and considering official artwork and even official songs are about Cloud and Aerith, I have to be honest, I just can't see how Tifa could be the proper partner for Cloud. She just doesn't do much, which is rather ironic because she lives and she appears a lot more than Aerith does, and yet Aerith has the larger impact. And that for me is far more insightful, rather than some big titty girl who blabbers on about the past forever and ever and ever every 5 seconds. Aerith and Cloud have chemistry, and every moment is different, whereas Tifa felt less and less impactful, and this is after hours upon hours of research, and I just cannot justify with a straight face, nor with any truly intelligent thought or discussion, that Tifa is his girl. An argument can be made for her, sure, but that requires making up things, which is, I'll be honest, when doing research, a lot of the stuff that Tifa fans were claiming were Tifa and Cloud stuff were made up on the spot. They were fictional, they weren't real. Whereas with the Aerith stuff, it is always relevant, it is real, and once again, thinking about the rule 3, the devs themselves even stating that Aerith's death in the original game completion is not a happy ending, I think it's pretty much further proving my point. And, you know, we have examples of rebirth in Kingdom Hearts, where a world without Aerith is a world that Cloud falls apart and falls into a deep depression in. But then, with Tifa gone, interestingly, he's happy, he's fine, he's alright, he's okay. It's kind of intentional and kind of odd, but at the same time, it kind of highlights the true nature of who's better. I mentioned before, I'm thinking about Aerith versus Tifa, some sort of court case. Aerith has all the evidence on her side, whereas Tifa has very little and honestly would struggle to win the case. Now, this shipping war is very toxic and hostile. Pretty much every shipping war is, but this one is one of the worst, in my opinion. And it should be noted that despite everything that I've just said, the devs themselves stated that neither girl ends up with Cloud, and that this love-it triangle was done on purpose. So in the end, whilst I am stating that all things considered Aerith is the proper and canonical choice, it doesn't really matter. You can have Cloud be the main love interest for Tifa. It's you, the player, who is Cloud. You get to make those choices. You can have Cloud be with Aerith, or you can have Cloud be with Barrett if you really want. It doesn't matter. It is your choice, and it is your choice to choose. I think you need to understand that. Hell, one of the main themes in the remakes is destiny. It is your destiny and it is your choice to choose what comes next. And I think that's important to understand. Hope you enjoyed this very large project. It has taken me forever to put together and script and research and do all this stuff. But hopefully it was worth the wait. Maybe it wasn't, and maybe you want to stab me in the throat, or maybe you want to praise me. I don't care. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.